She returned everything. Every scarf he had chosen with care. Every book he had marked with handwritten notes in the margins. Every record he had tracked down because she mentioned the artist once 3 years ago, in passing. She boxed up 3 years of quiet devotion and left it on his doorstep without a single word. But when Logan Sterling emptied that box onto his kitchen floor, his hands shaking, his chest caving in, he counted. He cataloged. He went through every item twice. And then he realized. She had kept one thing, the wooden bird. This is a story about what happens when two people spend 3 years being almost brave enough. Hit like, drop your city in the comments. Let me see how far this story travels. Now stay with me because this one doesn't let go easy. The thing about Logan Sterling that most people never understood, the thing the business profiles always missed, the thing the Forbes spreads glossed over with their careful lighting and rehearsed quotes, was that he genuinely did not care about money the way people assumed he did. He cared about broken things. That was it. That was the whole engine underneath everything. He cared about a building that had been left to rot for 40 years, its windows boarded, its bones still good, and the particular satisfaction of walking through it 6 months later after his cruise had finished and hearing it breathe again. He cared about a family business 3 generations deep that had hemorrhaged cash through a pandemic and bad luck and 2 terrible years of leadership, and the feeling of sitting across from that family, handing them back something that looked like a future. He was 32 years old. He had 260 employees. He had a brownstone in Boston and a farmhouse in Vermont and a stake in 11 different companies across 4 states. He had been written about in magazines he had never asked to be in, photographed at events he attended mostly out of obligation, and approached by women at roughly the rate of 1 every business trip who wanted something from him that had nothing to do with who he actually was. None of that was the point. None of that was the thing he came home for. The point was the small pair of sneakers by the front door. The point was the sound of his daughter's voice from upstairs, narrating an elaborate story to a collection of stuffed animals she had arranged in a parliament on her bedroom floor, each one with a name and a grievance and an opinion on whatever legislative matter she had decided was pressing that afternoon. Lily Sterling was 6 years old, and she was, Logan had decided, the most interesting person he had ever met. She had her mother's eyes, dark and fast-moving, always scanning, always 3 thoughts ahead of whatever was happening in the room. She had Logan's stubbornness, which he recognized with a mixture of pride and private exhaustion every time she decided something and refused to undecide it. She liked strawberry jam, but not strawberries. She had opinions about fonts. She had asked Logan, at age 5, why buildings had to look boring, and then spent 45 minutes explaining to him, with a crayon and 3 sheets of paper, what she would do differently. He had kept those drawings. They were in a folder in his desk at the office. Her mother had left when Lily was 14 months old. Not dramatically, not violently, just quietly, in the way that some people realize a life isn't fitting them the way they thought it would, and they leave before it gets worse. Logan did not hate her for it. He had needed years to get there, but he had gotten there. Lily didn't ask about her mother much. When she did, Logan answered honestly, in the simplified and careful way you answer a child. She loved you. She had things she needed to figure out that had nothing to do with you. And watched his daughter absorb the information and file it somewhere and go back to her stuffed animal parliament. He was genuinely okay. That was the other thing people missed. They looked at him. The money, the company, the single fatherhood, the controlled precision of how he moved through the world, and they assumed some wound underneath, some damage running the whole operation. And maybe there had been, once. But Logan had spent a long time building something real out of the pieces that were left. And what he had now was a life he had chosen carefully, and a daughter who made him laugh every single day, and a work that meant something. He was okay, except for Emily. He had met her on a Tuesday in October, 3 years ago, during the kind of afternoon that felt ordinary while it was happening, and only revealed itself as significant later, when you were lying awake at 2 in the morning trying to understand the precise moment your life had shifted direction. He had been looking for a specific book. A first edition, mid-century, a gift for one of his older contractors who was retiring, a man named Bud who had spent 40 years restoring masonry and who Logan genuinely respected and wanted to give something that wasn't a card with a check in it. He'd heard there was a secondhand bookstore on Clement Street that sometimes had unusual inventory. He hadn't expected much. The store was narrow and slightly overcrowded, the kind of place that had run out of shelf space and simply started stacking. There were books on the floor in careful arrangements, books in the window display, books piled on the small wooden counter with a handwritten sign that said, "Please don't reorganize these. I know where everything is." It smelled like paper and dust and something faintly floral that he couldn't identify. Emily Carter was on a stepladder in the back, reaching for something on the highest shelf, muttering quietly to herself. He watched her for a moment. He noticed this in the neutral, cataloging way he noticed most things, genuinely pretty, in a way that was slightly disheveled and completely unperformed. Her dark hair was half up, half escaping. She was wearing a green sweater that had a small hole near the left elbow. She was muttering something that sounded like a complaint directed at the architecture of the shelf itself. "Excuse me," he said. She startled, grabbed the shelf, wobbled, and caught herself. "Sorry," he said quickly. "I should have... Sorry." She looked down at him from the ladder with an expression that moved rapidly through several phases: surprise, mild irritation, recovery, and then a slightly reluctant composure. "It's fine," she said. "I've been meaning to come down for a while." She climbed down. She was shorter than she'd seemed on the ladder, 5'4", maybe 5'5". She brushed her hands on her jeans. "Can I help you find something?" He told her what he was looking for. She didn't write it down, didn't check a database, just stood there for a moment with her arms crossed and her head slightly tilted, thinking. Then she said, "Third row from the back, left side, about eye level for me, which means about chin level for you. It's between a Steinbeck and something about railway engineering. The spine's a little faded, but the pages are clean." He found it exactly where she said it would be. When he brought it to the counter, she looked at it, then looked at him. "Who's it for?" "A contractor, retiring." "Good choice," she said. "He'll know you meant it." Logan paid for the book. He stood at the counter for a moment longer than was strictly necessary, trying to think of something to say that wasn't awkward. He failed. He said, "Thanks," and left. He came back the following Tuesday. Potats. He told himself it was because he'd remembered another book he needed. That was partially true. He was always looking for something specific, always had a list. Gifts for clients, books he'd promised to read, things Lily had asked about that he wanted to find in physical form rather than ordering online. The bookstore was genuinely useful. Emily was less guarded the second time. Slightly. She had the particular wariness of someone who had been disappointed often enough to make wariness a default setting, but she was also, underneath it, curious. He could see her noticing him while pretending not to notice him. He did the same thing. They talked about books for 20 minutes. He learned that she had opinions, specific and uncompromising ones, about literary fiction, that she'd been working at the store for 2 years, that the owner was an older man named Gerald, who came in 3 days a week and trusted her completely with the other 4. He learned that she was 30 years old, though not because she told him directly, but because she mentioned a birthday the previous August and did the math in his head. He did not learn much else. She was careful with personal information the way some people are careful with money. Not stingy exactly, just aware of what things cost. He came back the following week, and the week after that. By December, they were something, not a couple, not quite friends. Something that existed in the particular register of a Tuesday afternoon, between the narrow shelves and the complicated stacking system, where they talked about everything except what was actually happening. He gave her the first gift in January. It was a scarf. Wool, dark blue, with a slightly uneven weave that made it interesting to look at. He'd found it in a small shop in Vermont during a site visit and thought of her immediately, which had surprised him a little, the immediacy of it. He brought it into the store on a Tuesday and set it on the counter and said, without much ceremony, "I saw this and thought you'd like it." She looked at it, then she looked at him. Her expression did something complicated that she quickly straightened out. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know." She picked it up, held it for a moment. "It's really nice." "You don't have to keep it if—" "I'm keeping it," she said, and something in her voice was more definite than the words required, like she was saying 2 things at once. He drove home that evening and sat in the parking garage of his building for 10 minutes before going upstairs, aware that he was navigating something carefully and not entirely sure he was doing it right. The gifts continued. Never expensive. That was important to him. He was aware acutely of what it would mean if he leaned into money with Emily. It would change the entire texture of what they had. It would make it about resources rather than attention, and what he wanted her to understand, what he kept trying to articulate through objects instead of words, because words had never been his sharpest tool, was that he paid attention to her. That was all. That he listened when she talked and remembered what she said, and occasionally, when something in the world aligned with something she'd mentioned, he brought it to her. An out-of-print album she'd said she used to own and had lost in a movie. A small illustrated field guide to North American birds because she'd mentioned once, briefly, that her grandmother had kept a bird feeder, a bag of a specific loose-leaf tea from a shop in Cambridge because she'd complained that the brand she liked had stopped being carried by the grocery store near her apartment. Small things. Careful things. She never thanked him the way people thank you for expensive gifts. No effusiveness, no performance of gratitude. She would hold whatever it was and get quiet for a moment, and then say something real. I've been looking for this for 2 years. Or, how did you even know? Or sometimes nothing at all, just a long look that carried more weight than most conversations Logan had in an average week. He loved that about her. Her silences meant something. He knew she was struggling financially. She didn't talk about it directly, but he was observant, and the details accumulated. The careful way she talked about her apartment, the fact that she always brought lunch from home, the particular quality of hesitation before she mentioned anything that cost money. Gerald paid her a fair wage for the work she did, but fair wages for independent bookstore work were not generous wages by any objective standard, and Emily lived alone in a city where a loan was expensive. He wanted to help in practical ways. He didn't because he understood, without her having to explain it, that she would hate it, that an offer of financial help would reframe everything between them into something she'd have to refuse or resent. So he kept his practical impulses to himself and kept bringing small things that said, I see you instead of I can fix this. He thought about her more than was reasonable. He thought about her while he was in meetings, while he was reviewing contracts, while he was reading to Lily at night. He thought about the way she laughed at something she found genuinely funny versus the way she smiled politely at something she was just being kind about. The difference was in her eyes, which were either lit or performing. He thought about the fact that she was, underneath the wariness and the carefully managed expectations and the slightly battered quality of how she moved through the world, one of the most alive people he had ever encountered. He did not tell her any of this. This was the failure. This was the thing he would come to understand later had cost them both something real. He was, and this was the honest word for it, afraid. Not of rejection in the clean, abstract sense. Afraid of the specific thing that would happen if he said it out loud and she said no. That Tuesday afternoons in that bookstore, which had become the part of his week he most looked forward to, would become impossible. That she would feel pressured or uncomfortable or surveilled by the feelings he'd been carefully not expressing. And that the thing they had, the particular quiet warmth of it, would be gone. So he kept giving her small things, and she kept accepting them in her careful, real way. And 3 years went by like that, both of them speaking a language that neither was willing to translate. He built the wooden bird in November. He did woodworking sometimes, in the small workshop he'd set up in the garage of the Vermont farmhouse. Nothing formal, nothing he'd call a skill, just the satisfaction of making something physical after spending most of his time on things that existed in spreadsheets and negotiations and the abstract architecture of deals. He made small things, a wooden handle for a drawer, a simple frame, a toy truck for Lily that she'd declared was the best truck she'd ever seen, and then immediately crashed into a wall to test its structural integrity. The bird was a cedar waxwing, because that was the bird on the cover of the field guide he'd given Emily. He worked on it over 3 separate weekends, getting the shape wrong twice before getting it right. It was small, fit in his palm. He sanded it smooth, stained it a warm brown, painted the small yellow tip of the tail with a steady hand and a tiny brush. It wasn't perfect. The right wing was slightly thicker than the left. The eye was a little high. He wrapped it in tissue paper and brought it to the store on a Tuesday in early December. Emily unwrapped it slowly, stood with it in her hands for a long time, not saying anything. When she finally looked up, her eyes were bright in a way that made Logan's chest feel dangerously unsteady. "You made this," she said. "It's not perfect. The wing, you made this." "Yeah." She looked back down at it, ran her thumb along the small painted tail. "Logan, it reminded me of... I know what it reminded you of." She closed her fingers around it gently. "I'm keeping this forever." He drove home through December traffic, and spent the entire drive trying to understand why he still couldn't find the words when every part of him knew exactly what he felt. He didn't see her for almost 8 weeks after that. It wasn't intentional. Not at first. He had a major project in Hartford that consumed December and January, traveling back and forth, managing a crew that was dealing with unexpected structural problems in a building that had looked solid on paper. He called the store twice. She wasn't available the first time, and the second time they talked for 20 minutes about a book she'd found that she thought he'd like, and it was good, it was warm, it was everything a phone call could be except for the part where he said what needed to be said. He told himself he'd say it in person, when the Hartford project stabilized, when he had time to do it properly. The Hartford project didn't stabilize until late January. He went back to the store on the first Tuesday in February, carrying the weight of all those unspoken weeks, prepared to finally be honest. The lights were on. Gerald was behind the counter, sorting a box of new inventory. Emily wasn't there. She took the afternoon off, Gerald said, in the mild way Gerald said most things. She'd do that sometimes now. She needed some air. Logan bought a book he didn't need and went home. The box arrived on a Thursday. He came back from picking Lily up from school and found it on his front steps. A cardboard box, medium-sized, taped shut, with his name written on the top in Emily's handwriting. Clean and careful, the way she wrote the titles of books in the store's catalog. Lily said, "What's that, Daddy?" "I don't know yet, Bug." He picked it up. It was heavier than he expected. He got Lily settled with her afternoon snack before he opened it. He needed a moment to himself, and he wasn't entirely sure why. Just a feeling, a low, persistent tone in the back of his chest that told him this required private attention. He sat at the kitchen table after Lily was in the living room with her stuffed parliament, and he opened the box. He recognized things immediately. The scarf, folded neatly, the dark blue wool, the out-of-print album in its original sleeve, undamaged, the illustrated bird field guide, a small square of paper tucked between the cover and the first page with a note that just said thank you for this one in particular. He looked at the note for a long time. The bag of tea, still sealed, which meant she'd ordered more somewhere and never opened the one he'd given her. A small hardcover he'd found at an estate sale that he'd thought she'd love, which she clearly had. The spine was slightly creased, the pages had the faint quality of having been read, and she had returned it anyway. He went through the entire box. He counted. He went through it a second time, slower, putting each item on the kitchen table in a row. And then he sat back and stared at the empty box and understood what was missing. The wooden bird. Every gift. Everything. 3 years of small, careful attention, every object that had ever tried to say what he wouldn't say out loud. She had returned all of it. She had packed it up and taped it shut and put his name on the top in her clean handwriting, except the bird. He sat with that for a long time. Lily came into the kitchen eventually, took one look at the object spread across the table, and said with the particular directness of a 6-year-old, "Did something happen, Daddy?" "I'm figuring that out," he said. "Do you need a hug?" He did. He let her give him one. She was warm and solid and smelled like peanut butter, and he held on a moment longer than a casual hug warranted. "Better?" she asked. "Getting there." She went back to her parliament. Logan sat at the kitchen table until the kitchen got dark, and then he picked up his phone and called Emily. "So." She answered on the third ring, which meant she'd seen his name and had to think about it first. He understood that. "Hey," he said. "Hey." Her voice was careful, controlled. "I got the box." Silence. The particular texture of a silence that's working on staying composed. "I figured," she said. "Emily." He didn't know what word came after that. He tried anyway. "I don't understand." "I know you don't." Her voice was quieter now, rougher. "Can you help me understand? Because I'm sitting here with everything you've given back, and I'm trying to figure out what this is supposed to... It's supposed to be an ending, Logan." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she went quiet, and he could hear her breathing, uneven. "Okay," he said, very carefully. "Okay. I hear that." Silence. "I looked through everything," he said. "Twice." She didn't say anything. "The bird," he said. "Emily, you kept the bird." The sound she made was not a word. It was the sound of someone trying to keep something together that was not holding together, and it went through Logan like a current. "I know," she said, barely. "Then why?" "Because I couldn't." Her voice broke cleanly on the word. "I tried. I put it in the box 3 times and I kept taking it back out. I couldn't put it in the box and leave it there. I couldn't. I don't know what that says about me. I don't know what that says about any of this. I just—" She stopped. He waited. "I can't explain it over the phone," she said finally, and she sounded exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. "I don't have the words right now." "Okay," he said. "Okay. That's okay." More silence. "I'm going to come to the store," he said. "After closing tomorrow. Will you be there?" A pause so long he wasn't sure what it meant. "Yeah," she said quietly. "I'll be there." "All right." "Logan." "Yeah." A pause. And then, so quiet he almost missed it. "I'm sorry about the box." He closed his eyes. "Don't be," he said. "Don't be sorry about any of it." He stayed on the phone for another 10 seconds after she hung up, in the dark kitchen with the row of gifts on the table in front of him and the wooden bird's absence in the center of it like a held breath. He didn't sleep well. Lily found him at the kitchen table at 6 in the morning with coffee and his laptop, reading over a contract he'd already read twice, which was what he did when his brain wouldn't settle. She climbed into the chair beside him, her hair chaotic from sleeping, her stuffed rabbit under her arm. She looked at the things still on the table, he hadn't moved them, and at her father, and said nothing for a moment. "Is this about someone you love?" she asked. Logan looked at her. "What?" Gerald said, "Gerald's the person at the bookstore, remember? I met him when you took me there. He said you spend a lot of time at that store." She said it with the matter-of-fact quality she brought to most observations. "And you look like when I lose something important. But bigger." He thought about lying, or redirecting, or doing the thing parents do when they don't want to get into something complicated before 7 in the morning. He decided against it. "Yeah," he said. "It's about someone I love." Lily processed this. "Are you going to fix it?" "I'm going to try." She nodded slowly, as if this were the correct answer to a question she'd been expecting to ask for a while. Then she reached across the table and put her small hand on his for exactly 3 seconds, which was her particular version of solidarity, and then she picked up his coffee cup and examined it. "This smells bad," she said. "It's coffee." "I know what coffee is. It smells bad." She set it down. He laughed. Not a lot, just a short, surprised burst of it, the kind that doesn't ask your permission. "Yeah," he said. "You might be right. Psst." He went to the bookstore the next evening at 6:30 after closing. The closed sign was in the window, but the lights were on inside. The warm, amber light that the store always had in the evenings, coming through the crowded shelves and giving everything a slightly underwater quality. He could see her through the glass. She was sitting on the floor between 2 shelves, her knees pulled up, something held in both hands. He already knew what it was. He tried the door. It was unlocked. The bell above it rang when he pushed it open. That particular clear note he'd heard dozens of times. And Emily looked up. She hadn't been expecting him quite yet. He could see that. She'd been somewhere inside herself, somewhere that required the particular posture of a person who is very alone and trying to be okay with it, and the bell had brought her back to the surface. She didn't stand up. She stayed on the floor, and he could see the wooden bird clearly now, the small cedar waxwing with its slightly asymmetrical wings and its careful painted tail resting in both her palms like something she'd been trying to figure out what to do with. Logan walked to the end of the aisle and sat down on the floor across from her, his back against the opposite shelf. They looked at each other across the narrow space between them. The store was very quiet. "Hey," he said. "Hey." Her voice was rough. She'd been crying before he arrived, or very close to it. He didn't say anything right away. He looked at the bird in her hands, and then at her face, and he thought, not for the first time, and with the same weight it always carried, that she was one of the most complicated and genuine people he had ever known, and that he had spent 3 years being too afraid of the wrong things. "You want to tell me?" he said. She looked down at the bird. Her thumb moved over the painted tail again, that same small motion. "I'm tired," she said. "Of what?" "Of this." She gestured, a small movement that seemed to mean the space between them, or the store, or all of it. Of being in something that feels like almost. All the time, just almost. Like standing outside a room where something good is happening and never actually going in. Logan said nothing. He let it land. I know that's not fair, she said. I know I never said anything either. I never pushed. She stopped. Started again. I got tired of waiting for something I wasn't even sure I was supposed to want. Because every time I let myself believe, she cut off again. What? He said quietly. That this was going somewhere. She looked up at him. Her eyes were dark and wet and entirely unguarded, which was a thing he hadn't seen from her before, not like this. Every time I let myself believe it was going somewhere, I'd come back to the part where I'm a woman who works in a secondhand bookstore and makes $31,000 a year, and you're Logan Sterling, and I'd think... She laughed, but it was a painful laugh, the kind that's a close cousin to crying. I'd think, come on, Emily, wake up. Emily, I'm not looking for reassurance right now, she said firmly. I'm just telling you why I put everything in the box. Because it felt better to end it myself than to keep waiting for you to realize you could do better and have it end that way. Silence. Logan leaned his head back against the shelf behind him and looked at the ceiling. He stayed like that for a moment, just breathing. Okay, he said. Okay? She looked at him. I heard you. He straightened up, met her eyes. Now I need you to hear me. She waited. I carved that bird over 3 weekends, he said. I got the shape wrong twice. I kept starting over because I wanted it to actually look like a cedar waxwing and not like something Lily made in art class, which... He shook his head. No offense to Lily, she's very talented, but... He paused. I painted the tail with a brush the size of a toothpick because I wanted the color right. And when I wrapped it up to bring to you, I sat in my truck outside my house for 10 minutes trying to figure out what I was going to say when I gave it to you. Emily was very still. I've been trying to figure out what to say for 3 years, he said. That's on me. I know that. I kept finding ways to say it without actually saying it, which is... He stopped. Which is cowardly, honestly. I know that too. He looked at her. But I need you to know that every single thing I put in that box, every scarf and album and field guide and bag of tea, I found those things and thought of you, and that was not... Emily, that was not the behavior of a man who's planning to realize he can do better. That was the behavior of a man who was terrified of losing what he already had. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes got brighter. You don't, she said carefully, get to be terrified of losing something you never actually claimed. The words landed. He felt them. You're right, he said. You're completely right. The store was quiet around them. Outside, the street noise of a Friday evening, distant and ordinary. Emily looked down at the bird one more time. Her hands moved around it, and then she held it out toward him. Not giving it back exactly, more like showing it to him. 3 times, she said. I put it in the box 3 times. I know. I couldn't do it. Her voice broke on the word. I don't know what that means. I think it means... She stopped. The tears that had been threatening arrived, quiet and serious, without performance. She didn't try to stop them. I think it means I don't want to let go of you. I've been trying to figure out how to let go of you for months. I cannot do it. Logan moved. He crossed the narrow space between them and sat beside her, close, their shoulders touching, and he put his hand over both of hers where they held the bird. Then don't, he said. She turned her face toward him. Up close, in the amber light of the store, she looked exactly like herself. Imperfect and real, and the most important person in any room he'd been in for 3 years. Logan, she said, and then she couldn't say anything else. I know, he said. Me too. They stayed like that on the floor of the bookstore, between the crowded shelves, in the quiet that had finally, after 3 years, stopped being almost and started being something else. The wooden bird rested in her hands, the light inside was warm, and outside the city moved on, indifferent and loud, the way cities do when something small and private and entirely important is happening just out of sight. They stayed on the floor of the bookstore for a long time. Not talking, mostly. The city outside did what cities do. Ambulance somewhere, a car with its bass turned up too loud, the indistinct sound of a group of people passing the window with somewhere better to be. None of it reached them. The store had its own atmosphere, always had, The particular density of a place where a lot of old words were housed in a small space. Logan's hand was still over Emily's, and the wooden bird was still between them, and neither of them had moved since the thing that happened had happened. Not a kiss, not yet, just an acknowledgement, a mutual and terrifying arrival at the same place at the same time. That was its own kind of enormous. Emily was the one who moved first. She shifted slightly, turned the bird over in her hands, and said without looking at him, "I should probably tell you what happened in January." Logan waited. "I almost came to find you," she said. "In January, when you were gone for all those weeks on the Hartford thing." She paused. "I got as far as looking up the address of your office. I sat outside for, I don't know, long enough that the woman at the coffee cart across the street asked if I was okay." "You came to my office?" "I sat outside it." She was careful about the distinction. "I didn't go in. I sat on a bench for half an hour, and then I talked myself out of it and took the train home." Logan looked at the side of her face. She was still watching her own hands. "What were you going to say?" he asked. "I was going to tell you, She stopped. Tried again. "I was going to tell you that I was tired of being afraid and that I needed to know if there was something real here or if I was just—" A short exhale. "Imagining it. Because the alternative was that I'd spent 3 years developing feelings for someone who was just being kind to me, and that would be—" She shook her head. "That would have been a lot to be wrong about. You weren't imagining it. I know that now." She finally looked at him, and the look was dry and slightly exasperated in the particular way she got when something was both obvious and painful. "That's not very useful information in January." "No," he agreed. "It's not." She looked back down. "After I talked myself off the bench, I went home and I cleaned my apartment, and I made a very deliberate decision that I was going to stop waiting, that if it wasn't going to happen, I needed to let it not happen instead of just orbiting it. And for a few weeks that actually sort of worked." She turned the bird over once more. "And then you came back." "To the store?" "To the store. And you walked in on a Tuesday afternoon like nothing had changed, and Gerald went in the back and it was just the two of us, and you told me about the Hartford building and some problem with the load-bearing walls, and how one of your guys had caught it before it became a catastrophe." She stopped. "You were telling me about a wall, Logan, structural support, and I was standing there thinking this is completely unbearable." He found he didn't know what to say to that, so he didn't say anything. He was aware that this was her telling him something real, and that the correct response was to let it be real. "That was 3 weeks before the box," she said. "I spent 3 weeks trying to figure out how to be the person who could walk away cleanly, and what I ended up with was a cardboard box, and a Saturday afternoon, and a wooden bird I couldn't put down." The store settled around them. A board creaked somewhere in the back, the old building adjusting itself. The amber light from the reading lamp in the corner reached exactly this far and no further. "Can I tell you something?" Logan said. "That seems fair." "I knew," he said, "not in a detailed way. I knew exactly what you were thinking, but I knew something was wrong. In January, when I came back to the store." He was looking at the shelves across from them, the cracked and layered spines of 100 different books. "You were different, not cold, just careful, more careful than usual, like you'd made a decision and were trying to hold it." Emily was quiet. "I told myself I was reading into it," he said. "I told myself I was projecting, that I was noticing what I was afraid of noticing because I was already scared of losing this." He gestured vaguely at the space between them. "And I came back 2 more times and told myself I was going to say something, actually say it, and both times I walked out with a book I didn't need and a conversation that didn't go anywhere because I am apparently very skilled at finding creative ways to be a coward." "You're not a coward," she said. "Emily, you're not. You're just—" She considered. "You're someone who rebuilds things carefully. You don't do anything fast. You take it apart and look at all the pieces and make sure you understand it before you commit." She paused. "That's not cowardice. It's just a bad strategy when the other person doesn't know you're doing it." He thought about that. About whether it was true or whether it was her being generous because she was still in the middle of feeling something large and didn't want to add blame to the pile. "Maybe both things are true," he said. "Maybe?" She leaned her head back against the shelf behind her, mirroring his posture from earlier. "From this angle, in this light, She looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour, the kind of tired that accumulates. "How long have you been this tired?" he asked. She glanced at him sideways. "That's a big question. You don't have to answer it." She was quiet for a moment, then, "A while. Since before you. The bookstore stuff it's good. I love the work. Gerald's great. But it doesn't." She made a small, frustrated gesture. "There's not a lot of room to get ahead. And my apartment situation got complicated last fall. My landlord sold the building. The new management company is—" She stopped herself. "This is not what we're talking about right now." "It's what you're living with right now," he said. "That counts." She looked at him, and the look was careful, assessing. The way she looked at him sometimes when she was trying to figure out his angle. He'd seen that look before and he understood it. She was checking to see if the attention was real or if it was the particular kind of attention that wanted something back. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "That's all I meant." The assessing quality softened. Not all the way, but enough. "The new management company raised the rent 40%, she said. "In November. I've been trying to figure out my options since then." "Okay," he said. "I'm not telling you that, so you'll—" "I know." He said it simply, without filling in the blanks she'd left. "I know." She studied him another moment. Then she looked back at the bird. "Her name is Ruth," she said. Logan blinked. "The bird." "I named her in December." She held it up slightly. "Ruth, after my grandmother, the one with the bird feeder." He felt something shift in his chest. Something warm and slightly painful, the way things are when they matter. She had named the bird he carved. She had given it the name of someone she loved. She had been carrying this small wooden thing around her life for months, and she had named it after her grandmother, and she had put it in the box 3 times and taken it back out, and none of that was the behavior of someone who didn't know exactly what it was. "Ruth's a good name," he said. "She's a good bird." Emily lowered it. "Considering the wing situation, the wing is fine. The right wing is— The wing is fine, Emily." She almost smiled. It didn't quite make it all the way to a smile, but it got close, and that was enough. That was more than enough. They finally stood up, both of them slightly stiff from the floor. Emily made a quiet sound that was not quite a groan. And Logan helped her to her feet without making anything of it, and they stood in the narrow aisle looking at each other in the ordinary way of 2 people who have just been through something and haven't fully processed the other side of it yet. "I need to lock up," she said. "Okay." "And She looked down at the bird in her hand, then at him. "I'm not in a place where I can do this fast. I need you to know that. Whatever this is, I can't—" She searched for the word. "I can't run at it. I need it to be slow." "I know," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." She looked at him long enough that the look became its own kind of thing. "You keep saying that," she said. "I keep meaning it." She nodded once, short and deliberate, the way she did when she'd processed something and filed it. Then she went to lock the back room, and Logan stood by the door and waited. And outside, the city moved through its Friday evening in its indifferent and ordinary way, and the wooden bird sat on the counter with its slightly asymmetrical wings and its painted tail and its new name. Ruth. He liked that. He liked that a lot. Posip. They started doing something that neither of them named for several weeks. This was, they would understand later, exactly the right approach. On the first Tuesday after the floor conversation, which was how Logan thought of it, the floor conversation, as a fixed point, he came into the store at the usual time, and Emily was with a customer, an older man in a corduroy jacket who was looking for something specific and slightly obscure. And Logan browsed in the back while she helped him, and when the man left, she came to find Logan between the shelves and said, "There's a bakery 2 blocks up that has these almond things I've been thinking about for 3 days. Do you want to go get some?" It was not quite a question. He noticed that. He also noticed that she said "we" without saying "we," which was a thing Emily did. She implied inclusion without announcing it, left the door open, and let you decide whether to walk through. "Yeah," he said. "Let's go get some." They went to the bakery. They sat at a small table by the window and ate almond pastries that were, as advertised, worth thinking about. Emily told him about a collection of letters she'd found in a box of donated books that week. Private correspondence between 2 people from the 1940s, mixed in with someone's estate, clearly accidental. She'd been trying to decide what to do with them. Can you read what they say? Logan asked. I've read 2 of them. She looked slightly guilty about this. I know, but I needed to understand what they were before I figured out what to do with them. And what are they? Love letters. She picked at her pastry. Very formal love letters, the kind where they call each other Miss and Mister in the greeting, but you can tell by the end of each one that someone is completely undone. She paused. They're from different people, not a matched set. 2 letters from him and 1 from her. So you don't know how it ended? No, and I probably never will. She said it with the particular philosophical sadness of someone who is genuinely okay with not knowing things, but would prefer to know this one. I contacted the estate agency to see if there's a family, but it's unlikely. The man's name was Thomas. The woman was Margaret. A pause. I like that they wrote letters, that they put something permanent down. Logan looked at her. Is Gerald going to keep the letters? He doesn't know about them yet. I'm working up to telling him. She picked up her coffee cup. I might just keep them myself. Is that terrible? Thomas and Margaret would probably want someone to have them who cares, he said. She looked at him over the rim of her cup. The look lasted a beat longer than a casual look. Yeah, she said. That's what I think too. He walked her back to the store afterward, and at the door they stood in the way that you stand when you're working out a goodbye, and Emily said, Same time next week? Yeah, he said. Same time. He walked back to where he'd parked and sat in the car for a moment, not driving, just sitting with the fact that asking each other back was its own kind of progress. Small, real. He told Lily about Emily the following Saturday. Not because he'd planned to, but because Lily asked a direct question, and lying to a 6-year-old felt worse than the complexity of honesty. They were at the Vermont farmhouse for the weekend, which Lily loved with a focused and specific passion. She liked the creek behind the property, the particular squeaking stair on the 2nd floor, and the workshop where Logan did woodworking, which she treated as a combination museum and laboratory and was only allowed in with supervision and closed-toe shoes. She had found the shavings from the bird on the workbench, the small leftover bits of cedar from when Logan had carved it, which he hadn't swept up because he hadn't been back since. Did you make something? She asked. A while ago, yeah. What? A bird. She looked at the shavings, then at him, with the expression she used for information processing. For someone? Yeah. The person you love? She said. No preamble, no softening. Logan set down the tool he'd been holding. Yeah, Bug. For her. Lily nodded seriously. Does she like it? She kept it, he said. When she returned everything else, she kept the bird. Lily processed this with the solemnity it deserved. That means she loves you too, she said. Like it was obvious. Like he'd presented her with a math problem that had a clear answer, and she couldn't understand why he found it complicated. It's not quite that simple, he said. Why? Because... He stopped. He looked at his daughter's entirely direct 6-year-old face and thought about explaining complexity and timing and the specific damage that accumulates in people over years of being let down, and decided she was right. The core of it was simple. Everything else was the work. You're right, he said. It mostly means that. She looked satisfied. Then, is she nice? She's honest, he said, which was the truest answer he had. Sometimes that's better than nice. Lily considered this carefully. Can I meet her? Maybe, sometime. Not a yes, she said, which was a phrase she'd gotten from him and deployed with uncanny accuracy. Not yet, he said, but eventually. She accepted this because she had learned to read his probably nots from his not yets, and she trusted the difference. She put her closed-toe shoes on the workbench and looked around the workshop with her assessor's eye. Can you teach me to make something? She asked. What do you want to make? She thought about it. A bird, she said finally. A different kind. He got out the wood and the tools, and they spent the afternoon on it, Lily's bird being a significantly more abstract interpretation of the concept, more geometric, with strong opinions about its own tail. But by dinner time it existed, which was all that a made thing needed to do. Logan put her bird on the windowsill next to the sink while they ate. She kept looking at it with a new proprietary satisfaction. It needs a name, she said. What do you want to name it? She thought. Frank? She decided. Frank it is. She nodded. Official. Frank can be friends with the bird you made for her. What's hers called? Ruth? Ruth and Frank, Lily said, like she was recording it somewhere reliable. They can be friends. Logan smiled at his soup. Outside the farmhouse windows, the February dark settled over the creek and the bare trees. And somewhere in the city, Emily was in her apartment with a 40% higher rent bill and a wooden bird she'd named after her grandmother. And Logan was in Vermont with his daughter, who thought love was simple and who was mostly right. February moved into March, in the way New England Februaries always do. Reluctantly, with occasional backsliding, the city getting its hopes up on a mild week, and then getting punished for it with 6 inches of wet snow. Emily's landlord situation got worse. The new management company was not, it turned out, negotiating in good faith. They'd raised rents across the entire building with the clear intent of turning over the existing tenants to refit for a higher market, and the lease Emily had was up in April. She mentioned this to Logan on a Tuesday in March in the flat, reporting ways she had of delivering bad news, and then moved on from it, and he let her move on because she'd asked him, not in words but clearly, not to solve her problems. He found this difficult. He was, by nature and profession, someone who assessed situations and identified solutions and applied resources. It was the whole engine, the thing that had built the company, the same impulse that made him look at broken buildings and see potential rather than damage. He looked at Emily's situation and he saw solutions, several of them. He did not offer any. What he did instead was show up more consistently, not just Tuesdays. He started texting in between, not constantly, nothing that required much from her, just things he saw in the world that made him think of her. A photo of an old building in Hartford he was visiting that had gorgeous original moldings that he thought she'd find interesting. A single line. Found a book I think is yours by accident. Bring it Tuesday. A text at 11 on a random Wednesday that just said, Gerald, okay? Because she'd mentioned Gerald wasn't feeling well and he remembered things. She texted back. Not always immediately, sometimes not until the next day. But she texted back. And the texture of her responses changed gradually, the careful quality softening degree by degree, the way a muscle unclenches when it's finally stopped bracing. One evening in mid-March, she sent him a photo. No caption. It was her apartment window, the view from inside, a single narrow slice of a street below with a street light and a bench and someone's dog pulling hard at a leash. At the bottom of the photo, just visible, the edge of the wooden bird on her windowsill, Ruth, watching the street. Logan looked at that photo for a while. Then he typed, "Good view from Ruth's spot." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "She's a homebody," Emily typed. "She keeps an eye on things." He smiled at his phone in his car in a parking garage like a person who was 32 years old and had 260 employees and had apparently not evolved past the age of 17 in at least one specific regard. He didn't mind. Gerald had a health scare in late March, a cardiac event, not a heart attack, the doctors were clear on that, but the kind of warning the body sends when it's been patient long enough. He was 68, and he had been running that bookstore for 31 years, and he was, by his own admission, not a person who did anything slowly or moderately. Emily called Logan when it happened, not someone else. Logan. He was in a meeting when his phone buzzed with her name, and he stepped out of the meeting without explanation in a way his assistant later told him had alarmed everyone in the room because Logan Sterling did not step out of meetings. "Hey, what's wrong?" he said, picking up. She told him. Her voice was steady in the way people get when they're frightened and they're working very hard on the steadiness. Gerald had collapsed at the store. He was at Mass General. He was stable and talking, but they were keeping him for observation. Emily had closed the store and taken a cab to the hospital, and she was in the waiting room now, and she had called Gerald's daughter, who was driving from Providence. "I'm coming," Logan said. "You don't have to. I'm coming." She didn't argue further, which told him more than anything else could have about how frightened she actually was. He was at Mass General within 40 minutes. He found Emily in the waiting room on the cardiac floor, her coat still on, her hands around a paper cup of coffee she clearly wasn't drinking. When she saw him, she stood up with the expression of someone who had been very determined to hold it together and was now finding that slightly harder to sustain. He crossed the room and she met him in the middle, and he put his arms around her and she put her face against his shoulder, and neither of them said anything for a while. She smelled like the bookstore, paper and dust and something faintly floral. He noticed this the way he'd noticed it the first time, standing at the back of the store watching her on a ladder, except now it was not a new observation, but a familiar one, the smell of a place that meant something. "He's stable," she said, muffled against his jacket. "I know, you said." "I know I said, I'm just—" She exhaled. "He's the person who gave me the job when I really needed a job. He hired me based on the fact that I could name 6 books in a minute that a customer might actually want. He didn't check references or anything. He just said, 'You know books. You're hired.'" A pause. "I've been working for him for 2 years, and he's never once made me feel like—" She stopped. "Like what?" Logan said quietly. "Like I owed him anything for saving me." She pulled back slightly, just enough to look up at him. Her eyes were wet. "Some people save you and make sure you always feel the weight of it. He just hired me and paid me fairly and trusted me with the store, and never once." She shook her head. "He sounds like a good man," Logan said. "He really is." Gerald's daughter arrived 2 hours later. A woman named Patricia, 50s, with Gerald's same directness and a brisk competence that Emily found reassuring. She embraced Emily with genuine warmth and told her that Gerald had specifically asked about the store, whether it had been properly closed up. "Front door, back door, register, alarm," Emily said. Patricia laughed. "That sounds exactly like him." She looked at Emily. "He asked about you too. Said to tell you he's sorry for the inconvenience." Emily's expression cracked, just briefly, and then she pulled it back together. "That's so like him," she said, and her voice was only slightly unsteady. Logan and Emily left the hospital around 8. Outside, the March air was cold and damp, and the streetlights were doing what streetlights do in March in Boston, which is illuminate everything in a way that looks like a feeling. They stood on the sidewalk, and Emily looked at him and said, "Thank you for coming." "Of course." "I called you first," she said, like she was identifying something. "I know. Is that—" She paused. "Is that a thing we're doing now? You're the person I call first?" He looked at her on the wet sidewalk in the cold March light, and he thought about 3 years and wooden birds and Tuesday afternoons and a box on a doorstep. "Yeah," he said. "I think that's a thing we're doing." She looked at him for a long moment. The city moved around them, unconcerned. "Okay," she said. Simple. The way she said things when she meant them. He walked her to the T-stop because she'd said she'd taken a cab to the hospital and preferred the train home, and at the entrance she stopped and turned. "I'm going to need to figure out my apartment," she said. It came out of nowhere, which meant it hadn't come from nowhere. She'd been holding it through the whole evening. "April is close." "I know. I'm telling you because—" She worked at the sentence. "Because I think maybe I can let you know when something's hard without needing you to fix it." He understood what that cost her to say. He understood it was a step towards something she'd been avoiding, which was the specific vulnerability of letting someone into the actual logistics of your life, instead of just the parts that were already okay. "That's all I want," he said. "Just tell me." She nodded. Then, unexpectedly, she reached up and touched his jaw with one hand. Just briefly. A single light touch. Her fingers cold from the March air. And then she went down into the tea station and was gone. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment longer. The cold was doing its cold thing. Around him, the city continued in its usual total indifference to anything specific that was happening to any individual person within it. He walked back to his car feeling, in a way he hadn't felt in a long time and couldn't entirely explain, like the ground was solid under him, like the thing he was building, slowly, imperfectly, with wrong measurements and do-overs and 3 weekends to get the shape right, was starting to hold. Gerald came home from the hospital 4 days later with a list of dietary restrictions he was already fighting with and a cardiologist's orders to reduce his hours. He called Emily himself to tell her she'd be running the store more independently for a while, and he said it like he was issuing an operational briefing, not like he was an old man who'd been frightened, though Emily could hear the fright underneath it, packed away carefully in the back of the voice. "You'll be fine," he said. "You know the store better than I do at this point." "That's not true," she said. "It's slightly true," he said. "Don't tell me otherwise, I have a heart condition now." She laughed, and it surprised her how much she meant it. She put the phone down and looked around the store. The complicated stacking, the books in careful floor arrangements, the handwritten signs in Gerald's particular handwriting. It was someone else's creation, this place, this specific accumulation of someone's taste and decades of decisions. And she had walked into it 2 years ago needing a job and found instead a thing that felt like belonging. Ruth was on the shelf behind the counter where Emily had moved her in February, in a spot where she could watch the door. It was, Emily admitted privately, slightly absurd that she'd given the bird a post. Slightly absurd, and entirely not something she was going to stop doing. She straightened a stack of books that didn't need straightening. She thought about Logan's hand on hers on the floor of the store. She thought about his shoulder in the hospital waiting room and the way he'd said, "I'm coming," without asking her whether she was sure or whether she really needed him, or any of the questions that people sometimes ask that are really about their own comfort rather than yours. She thought about the fact that she was 30 years old and had spent most of her adult life being careful, being managed, being small in the specific way that people get when they've been hurt enough to stop expecting much. And that there was a man who had carved a bird over 3 weekends and gotten the shape wrong twice and come to a hospital in 40 minutes and put his arms around her like it was the most natural thing, and who looked at her. She thought about how he looked at her, like she was the most interesting thing in any room. Not in the performative way of someone who wants you to know they find you interesting, just actually, genuinely, paying attention. Like she'd said something worth hearing and he was filing it away, and he would remember it later and it would matter. She was going to let this be real. That was the decision she arrived at, standing in Gerald's store on a Thursday afternoon with the complicated stacking and the handwritten signs and the wooden bird on the shelf behind the counter. She was going to stop performing okayness and let this be an actual thing that was actually happening. She was going to be afraid of it and do it anyway, which was the only way she knew how to do anything that mattered. She texted Logan. "Gerald's home, grumpy about the diet restrictions. He's fine." His response came back in 4 minutes. "Good. Tell Ruth." She looked at the bird on the shelf. "Gerald's home," she said. "He's fine." She. Ruth looked at the door with her painted eye, keeping watch, saying nothing, which was exactly right. The apartment situation resolved itself in the way that bad situations sometimes do. Not cleanly, not without cost, but with an outcome that was livable if you looked at it from the right angle. Emily found a place in Somerville, 2 rooms on the 3rd floor of a triple-decker owned by a woman named Dottie, who was 73 and had lived on the 1st floor for 40 years, and who had 2 requirements for tenants. They kept reasonable hours and they did not have parties. Emily met both requirements without effort. The rent was 15% higher than what she'd been paying before the management company got involved, which meant her monthly budget needed restructuring, which she did on a legal pad at her kitchen table on a Sunday in early April, in the practical and slightly grim way she approached most financial realities. She did not tell Logan how tight it was. She told him she'd found a place, and she told him it was in Somerville, and she told him the landlord's name was Dottie, and she seemed good. Logan asked if she needed help moving, and she said she didn't have much, and he said that wasn't what he asked, and she said, "Fine, Saturday if you want." He showed up on Saturday with his truck and his general physical competence, which Emily had suspected existed but had not previously observed at close range. He carried things without complaint and without making a performance of carrying things, which she noted. Her last serious relationship had involved a man who treated every heavy object as an opportunity to demonstrate effort in a way that required acknowledgement, and the absence of that particular dynamic was, she found, genuinely restful. They got everything moved in 4 hours. The apartment was small but had good light. 2 east-facing windows in the main room that caught the morning in a way Emily had identified immediately as the apartment's best feature. She put Ruth on the windowsill within the first 20 minutes of arriving, before the boxes were sorted or the furniture was positioned. Logan noticed, but didn't comment. He moved a bookshelf into the position she indicated and then stood back and looked at the room. "It's a good space," he said. "It's smaller than before." "Smaller can be good." She looked at him. "Are you philosophizing about my apartment square footage?" "I'm saying small spaces are easier to make feel like something." He looked at the east windows. "And you've got the light." She followed his gaze. The morning light was doing what it had been doing when she'd first walked through, coming in low and warm, falling across the floor in 2 long rectangles. "Yeah," she said. "I've got the light." Dottie appeared at the door 20 minutes later with a plate of something covered in foil, which turned out to be a dense and excellent coffee cake, and spent 15 minutes talking to them both with the comfortable directness of a woman who has been talking to people for 7 decades and sees no reason to be indirect about it. She looked at Logan with the assessing eye of someone who was deciding something. You her boyfriend? She asked him. Logan looked at Emily. Emily looked at Logan. We're figuring that out, Logan said. Dottie looked between them with an expression that communicated she found this answer mildly exasperating but acceptable. Well, she said, figure faster. Life doesn't hold still. She took the empty foil plate and went back downstairs. When she was gone, Emily looked at Logan and said nothing for a moment. She's not wrong, he said. I know she's not wrong. So, she crossed her arms, not defensively. She was cold, the apartment not yet warm from their moving around in it. So what? So we're figuring it out. We are figuring it out. She looked at him steadily. Are you impatient? He thought about the honest answer, which was that yes, on some level, after 3 years of Tuesday afternoons and carved wooden birds, he was impatient, in the way you're impatient with a slow process you believe in, not ready to quit, just aware of the time. A little, he said. She nodded like this was a reasonable and expected answer. Okay, she said. Okay? Okay. I appreciate the honesty. She uncrossed her arms. I'm getting there, Logan. I just need to... She looked at the boxes around them, the half-sorted new life. I keep waiting for the part where it falls apart. That's the honest answer. I know things are good right now, and I keep waiting for the thing that's going to make it make sense that good things don't last. He was quiet for a moment. That's a hard way to live. It's a learned behavior, she said. I'm working on it. He crossed the room and stood in front of her and put one hand along the side of her face, and she went still the way she sometimes did when he touched her. Not flinching, just going quiet, like her whole system took a breath. Take the time you need, he said. I'm not going anywhere. She closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, the careful quality was still there, but something underneath it had shifted. You have to stop saying that, she said. Which part? The part where you keep being patient with me. The corner of her mouth moved. It's very difficult to keep being afraid of something when the thing keeps being patient. He smiled. He couldn't help it. Yeah, he said. That's kind of the point. Chad, April became a different kind of month than the ones before it. They started doing things that were not bookstore Tuesdays. This was Logan's doing, mostly, or more accurately, it was the natural result of both of them stopping the pretense that they were managing a careful distance. He took her to dinner twice, real dinners at real restaurants where he made reservations, and she wore the dark blue scarf that had started all of this, which he noticed and did not mention. They went to a film series at an old theater in Cambridge on a rainy Wednesday, and in the dark, somewhere in the middle of the second half, her hand found his on the armrest and stayed there without either of them acknowledging it. He introduced her to Lily. This was not, ultimately, the production Logan had imagined it might be. He had worried about the introduction in the vague and unspecific way of a parent who wants to protect a child from the particular disappointment of caring about someone who might not stay. He'd thought about timing, about preparation, about what to say. What actually happened was that Lily was there when Emily came to pick up a book she'd lent Logan weeks earlier, and Lily opened the door before Logan got to it and looked at Emily with her fast-moving assessor's eyes. Are you Emily? Lily asked. Emily looked down at her. Yeah. Are you Lily? Yeah. Lily looked at her for another moment. You're the one who kept the bird. Emily blinked. Your dad told you about that? He said you kept it even when you gave everything else back. She said it in the even, reporting way she stated most things. He said he made it 3 weekends. He did. I made one too, Lily said. Mine is Frank. Then she stepped back and held the door open wider. Do you want to see Frank? Emily looked up at Logan, who was standing in the hallway trying not to look like someone who had failed to intercept this situation. I'd love to see Frank, Emily said. She went in. Logan stood at the door for a moment after it closed, listening to Lily's voice from the living room explaining Frank's construction and his personality and his relationship to the Parliament of Stuffed Animals. He heard Emily ask a question about one of the stuffed animals, and Lily's voice went up half a register with the specific pleasure of having her Parliament inquired about. He went inside. By the time he got to the living room, Lily had installed Emily on the floor and was introducing each Parliament member in turn, and Emily was listening with the focused attention she gave to things she actually found interesting, and Logan stood in the doorway of his own living room and understood that something had already been decided that he hadn't been asked to weigh in on. Later, After Emily had gone home and Lily was in bed, she called him. She named the stuffed animals after historical figures, Emily said. Did you know that? I have known this for a while, yes. Harriet Tubman is the elephant. The rabbit is called Benjamin Franklin for reasons she explained, and I mostly followed. A pause. She's extraordinary, Logan. He was quiet for a moment. The word had landed somewhere important. Yeah, he said. She really is. She asked me if Ruth was doing okay. Emily's voice had gone slightly soft. I told her Ruth was on the windowsill in my new apartment watching the street. She seemed to consider this an acceptable arrangement. High praise from Lily, he said. She doesn't accept most arrangements. He could hear Emily smiling through the phone. That was a new thing. He'd learned the difference between when she was smiling and when she wasn't, even without seeing her face. The texture of her voice changed slightly, got warmer around the edges. Thank you, she said, for tonight, for letting me meet her. She'd have been furious if I'd kept it from her much longer, he said. She asks about you. She does? She asks if I'm being patient. He heard Emily laugh. I told her yes. She said, good, you're working on it. Emily went quiet for a moment. She said that? She's very astute. Another pause. Logan? Yeah. I think I'm getting there. Her voice was quieter now and serious. I think I'm mostly there. I just keep waiting for the other shoe, he said. Yeah. I know, he said. It's okay. Is it? He said it the way he'd started saying it recently, shortened and easy, a thing that had become natural without announcement. It's okay. Wear both shoes whenever you're ready. I'm not counting. She laughed. The real one, not the polite one. He heard it and filed it in the place where he kept the things about her that mattered. Good night, Logan, she said. Good night, Sam. The thing with Marcus Hale happened in May, which was when Logan understood, in the specific and unambiguous way you sometimes understand things you've been almost understanding for a while, that Emily carried certain wounds at a different depth than she let on. Marcus Hale was an old colleague of Logan's. Not a friend, exactly. The category was more like known quantity in a shared professional circle. He ran a mid-sized development company in the Back Bay, slightly older than Logan, the kind of man who was good-looking in a polished and deliberate way, and who knew it in every room. Logan had worked with him on 2 projects in the past, both of which had been fine professionally and vaguely unpleasant interpersonally in ways he'd been too busy to fully examine at the time. He ran into Marcus at a fundraiser in early May, a Preservation Society event, the kind Logan attended out of genuine investment in the cause, and with the specific social energy of a man who is good at being in rooms but would prefer not to be. He was talking to a city councilwoman about a building in Roxbury when Marcus appeared, and they did the handshake and the how long has it been, and Logan noticed, because he noticed things, that Marcus was slightly too interested in asking whether Logan was seeing anyone. Logan was not a man who broadcast his personal life. He said something neutral about things being good, and Marcus said something that contained the word serious in a tone that suggested the answer had implications Logan hadn't identified, and Logan moved the conversation elsewhere. He didn't think much of it for the rest of that week. What he didn't know, and wouldn't know until later, until Emily told him, which she did eventually, was that Marcus Hale was the reason Emily had moved to Boston in the first place. She'd been 27, she'd been in a relationship with Marcus for 8 months, and she'd moved for it, uprooted from Providence, from her apartment, from a job she liked, and followed him to Boston because he'd said the right things in the right order, and she'd believed them. The relationship had ended 4 months after she moved, in the specific way that some relationships end when one person was never as invested as they seemed. Gradually, and then suddenly, with Marcus citing vague incompatibilities and Emily understanding eventually that the problem was that she had not turned out to be whatever he'd imagined, and he saw no reason to stay around while she figured herself out. She had stayed in Boston anyway. She'd found the bookstore. She'd built what she had. But Marcus Hale was the reason she'd had to build it from nothing, in a city where she didn't know many people, at 27 years old with a broken lease and a newly rearranged sense of what she was worth. She didn't tell Logan any of this in May. She didn't tell him because she'd been working hard on not being defined by it, and because bringing Marcus into what she had with Logan felt contaminating somehow, like introducing a wrong element into something she was carefully keeping clean. What happened instead was that Marcus sent her a message. He'd gotten her contact information through a mutual acquaintance. Emily had a small but real network from her first months in Boston, before the bookstore, when she'd been trying to build something and attending events and meeting people. And he sent her a message in early May that started with "Hi, stranger," and ended with a dinner invitation. She stared at it for 3 days before she deleted it. She almost didn't tell Logan. She very nearly decided it wasn't relevant, that it was handled, that there was nothing in the exchange that required conversation. But she had told herself she was going to stop being small, stop managing what people knew about her life so that they couldn't use it. She had made that decision in her new apartment with the east windows, and Ruth on the sill, and Dottie's voice rising from the first floor. She told Logan on a Thursday evening when he came to the bookstore after hours, which had become a regular thing. She told him the whole thing. Marcus, the move to Boston, the 4 months that unraveled everything, the specific texture of what it felt like to realize you'd uprooted your life for someone who was already half gone before you'd fully arrived. Logan listened. He didn't interrupt. He was sitting across the counter from her with his jacket still on, and his expression through the telling was the controlled and careful one he used when he was working to make sure his response didn't contaminate what she was saying. When she finished, the store was quiet. "He messaged you," Logan said. Not a question. "Last week." "What did he say?" "He wanted to get dinner." She watched Logan's face. "I deleted it." He nodded once, slowly. "Logan." "I'm fine," he said. "You look—" "I'm fine." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm angry, which is separate from fine, but the anger isn't at you." She looked at him. "Who's it at?" He held her gaze. "It's at the situation, at a man who took something from you and then had the specific audacity to reach back in once things looked different." He paused. "That's a recognizable pattern, and I don't like it." "It's handled," she said. "I know. I can handle things like that." "I know you can." His voice was even. "That's not what I'm upset about." She came around the counter and sat on the stool beside him, which put them at the same level, close. "Then what?" He was quiet for a beat. "You were 27. You moved for someone. That's not a failure on your part. That's a reasonable thing to do when you believe in something, and the failure was his." He said it matter-of-factly, not trying to comfort, just stating it. "I'm angry that it cost you as much as it did. The rebuilding. The being careful." A pause. "I'm angry that it made it harder for you to believe you were worth staying for." Emily didn't say anything for a moment. "That's very perceptive," she said finally. "I pay attention." "I know you do." She looked at her hands. "It did make it harder. You're right. I moved here and had to rebuild from scratch, and somewhere in that process, I think I decided the safest thing was to not need anything from anyone too much. Keep things manageable. Don't ask for more than you know you can keep." She paused. "And then you walked into the store asking about a book for a contractor, and you kept coming back and bringing things that—" She stopped. "That what?" "That said you'd been listening." Her voice was quiet. Nobody had been listening like that. Not in a long time. She looked up at him. "That's why the box was so hard. It was easier to send everything back than to sit with the fact that someone had been paying that kind of attention, and I was too scared to do anything about it." He put his hand over hers on the counter. Not a dramatic gesture, just his hand over hers, warm and steady. "I have a confession," he said. She waited. "Marcus Hale." He said the name carefully. "I know who he is." She went still. "What?" "I ran into him at an event in May, beginning of the month. He was—" Logan chose his words. "He was asking questions about whether I was seeing someone, in a way that I thought was odd, and I filed away and didn't look at again until right now." He paused. "I didn't know then. The connection. Now I do." Emily was quiet, processing the overlap, the coincidence, the way the past sometimes reaches back in from directions you didn't expect. "He knew you were in Boston," she said. "Apparently. And he knew somehow that we were— someone told him something, or he put something together, or he's just the kind of man who checks on things he walked away from when they start to look interesting again." Logan said it flatly. "That's a recognizable type." She felt a ripple of something she didn't want to feel. old and cold and slightly nauseating, the specific sensation of being reminded that you were once a thing someone could pick up and put down. "Hey," Logan said. She looked at him. "You're here," he said. "He's not." She held his gaze. "I know," she said. And she did know. She felt it. The solid fact of it in the warm-lit bookstore with Ruth on the shelf behind the counter and Logan's hand over hers. She knew it. She just needed a moment to let the old cold thing pass through. "Stay there," he said. "I'll make you terrible tea." She laughed despite herself. "You make terrible tea?" "I make adequate tea at best. Gerald's setup back there is not good. There's a kettle and 2 bags of—" "I know. I've seen it. It's not good." He was already moving toward the back room. "But it'll be hot." She watched him go. Terrible competent man, she thought, making her adequate tea in Gerald's insufficient back room after she'd just told him about the person who'd most damaged her, and not making it heavy or dramatic, or a reason she now owed him something. Just moving toward the kettle like that was the only reasonable next step. She turned and looked at Ruth on the shelf. The bird looked back with her single painted eye. "I know," Emily said quietly. "I know." June arrived and something shifted again. Not a single moment, but an accumulation of them, the way water gets warm. Not all at once, not dramatically, just degree by degree until one day you put your hand in and realize it changed while you weren't tracking it. They were, unambiguously and without further discussion, together. Dottie had stopped asking and started referring to Logan as your person with the comfortable authority of someone who has observed enough people to know what she's looking at. Lily had given Emily a drawing of Ruth the bird, her version, which gave Ruth a crown and a cape, and several characteristics Ruth did not possess in her wooden form, but which Lily felt were implied. Emily put it on the refrigerator in the Somerville apartment. Gerald came back to the store in a reduced capacity, 3 days a week, with a list of dietary restrictions he was complying with and loudly resenting. He met Logan properly in June, when Logan came in to pick up Emily for dinner and arrived 10 minutes early and ended up talking to Gerald for those 10 minutes about a building in the South End that Gerald remembered from 40 years ago. Gerald, when Emily came out of the back room, looked at Logan and then at Emily and said, "Competent man, knows his buildings." "High praise from Gerald," Emily said to Logan. "Second highest," Gerald corrected. "The highest would be if he knew his books." "He reads," Emily said. "What does he read?" "Mostly," she thought about it. "History, architecture history, some fiction." "What fiction?" Logan, who had been following this exchange with the expression of a man at a tennis match, said, "I read Cheever, and a lot of John Williams recently. Stoner, mostly." Gerald was quiet for a moment. "Stoner," he said, like he was weighing it. "Stoner," Logan confirmed. Gerald looked at Emily. "Keep him," he said, and went in the back. Emily looked at Logan. "Did I just get certified by Gerald?" Logan said. "You genuinely did." She picked up her coat. "He told me to return the last one, in those exact words." She paused. "He was right, for what it's worth." They went to dinner, and Logan thought about Gerald's face when he said stoner, the specific, satisfied expression of a man whose particular and private standard had been met, and felt the warm, low-grade pleasure of having passed a test he hadn't known he was taking. He also thought about the last one. He didn't ask. He knew enough now to know that Emily would tell him what she wanted him to know when she was ready to tell it, and that the rest was hers. What he knew was that Gerald had told her to return the last one, and that she had apparently decided Logan was different. He was going to do everything he could to make sure that was true. Bimba. It was a Sunday in late June when things broke open in the way they'd been building toward. They were at the farmhouse in Vermont, Emily's first time there, a thing Logan had suggested carefully, and she had agreed to with only a slight pause that he understood. Lily was with Logan's mother for the weekend, which was a regular arrangement, his mother living 40 minutes from the city and deeply invested in her granddaughter's parliament of stuffed animals. The farmhouse was theirs alone. Emily had walked the property in the afternoon, which pleased Logan in a way he couldn't fully explain. Just the sight of her moving through the space he'd made his own, stopping at things, picking up details. She'd stopped at the old stone wall at the edge of the property for a long time, running her hand along the top of it. "This is beautiful," she said when he came to stand beside her. "The wall?" "All of it." She looked out at the field beyond, the late afternoon light going gold across the grass. You fixed this place up? Most of it. He looked at the farmhouse behind them. The bones were good. It just needed attention. That's what you always say about the buildings you restore. It's usually true. She looked at him. Is it ever not? He thought about it honestly. Sometimes a building is beyond it. Sometimes too much has been let go for too long, but that's rarer than people think. He paused. Usually what looks like beyond repair is just significant work. People get scared of significant work. She was quiet. The field light moved. Are we still talking about buildings? She asked. We might not be, he said. She turned to look at him, and the look was direct in the particular way she was direct when she'd decided to be. I want to stop waiting for the other shoe, she said. I've been saying I'm getting there for 3 months. I think I'm there. I think I've been there for a while, and I've just been... She stopped, running the same fears because they were familiar. Okay, he said. I'm not going to be easy, she said. I want to be clear about that. I have habits that are hard to change, and I'm going to need things from you that I'm still learning how to ask for, and there are going to be days when I default to the worst version of my assumptions, and I'm going to need you to not... Emily? He said it quietly. She stopped. I know, he said. I know who you are. I've known for 3 years. She looked at him in the failing afternoon light, the stone wall behind her, the farmhouse behind them both, and something in her face shifted the way it had shifted that night on the floor of the bookstore. Not a collapse, just a clearing, like weather that had been threatening for a long time, finally doing the thing it had been building to. I love you, she said. First, without preamble. He looked at her. I know that's fast, she said, which was objectively not true given the timeline, and they both knew it. Emily, he said, it's been 3 years. It's been 3 months of... It's been 3 years, he said. There has not been a version of the past 3 years in which I haven't... He stopped, tried again. I love you. I have loved you probably since March of the first year, when you told me that the best thing I could do with a specific out-of-print collection was sit on it for 6 months and then donate it to the library system, and you said it like you were absolutely certain and had already done the math. He paused. I don't know what that says about me. It says your love language is competence, she said. That might be true. It's definitely true. She looked at him with the bright wet eyes she got when she was feeling something too big for the container. Say it again. Which part? The important part. He looked at her against the stone wall in the golden field and the Vermont evening that was starting to turn cool, and he said, I love you, Emily Carter. Without any ceremony, without anything wrapping it, just the thing itself, in the plain, serious voice he used for things that were true. She closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. When she opened them, she was smiling, the real one, all the way, the lit version. Okay, she said. Okay? Yeah. She reached out and took his hand. Okay, let's go inside. They went inside. The farmhouse was warm from the afternoon sun it had collected, and the kitchen smelled like the coffee they'd made that morning. And through the window over the sink, the field was still lit, going amber now at the edges. He made dinner, and she sat at the kitchen counter and kept him company, and they talked about Gerald's cardiologist and Lily's parliament, and a building in Roxbury Logan was considering taking on. And somewhere in the middle of all the ordinary conversation, the thing between them had changed shape, not enlarged exactly, just settled into its actual size, which was significant. After dinner, Emily went to the window over the sink and stood there looking out at the field in the dark, and Logan stood beside her. And outside there were stars the way there are stars in Vermont that you don't get in the city. Actual stars, in actual quantities, doing what stars do, which is exist and be indifferent and somehow comforting anyway. I'm scared, she said. I know. Not of you, she clarified. Of the... She made a small gesture. The size of it. When you care this much about something, the potential for it to go wrong is proportionate, he said. Yeah, that's true, he said. I can't fix that part. She leaned her head against his shoulder. I know. But I'm still here, he said. You're still here, she agreed. Outside, the field sat in the dark, and the stars did their indifferent thing, and the farmhouse held them both, its restored bones solid around them, the way things are when someone has taken the time to do the significant work. The summer came in its way New England summers always arrive. Tentatively at first, as if testing whether it was welcome, and then, all at once, with the particular intensity of a season that knows it doesn't have long. Logan noticed the change in Emily the way he noticed most things about her, gradually and then with sudden clarity. She was different after Vermont, not transformed in the dramatic sense. She was still Emily, still careful, still equipped with the dry precision that could diffuse any situation she found too sentimental. But there was less armor in the daily logistics of being with her. She called when she said she would. She told him when something was hard without first checking whether it was appropriate to tell him. She let him sit beside her when she was stressed about Gerald's reduced hours and the increased weight of running the store, and she didn't perform okayness for his benefit. This was, Logan understood, the thing she'd been working toward. The particular and difficult project of letting someone actually in, past the practice surface to the functional interior where the real decisions were made and the real worries lived. He knew it cost her something each time. He also knew that the only correct response was to receive what she offered without making it heavy, without flagging it with too much visible appreciation in a way that would make her feel exposed. He was not perfect at this. He was better at it than he'd been at anything comparable in his adult life, but perfect was not a thing he was. July arrived and the Roxbury project officially started. This was a significant undertaking, a block of 4 connected row houses that had been abandoned since the 90s, owned by a trust whose beneficiaries had finally agreed to sell, located in a neighborhood that was changing in ways that required careful navigation if the restoration was going to serve the community rather than just the market. Logan had spent 6 months in the due diligence phase alone. He had consultations with neighborhood groups, with historic preservation officers, with an architect who specialized in exactly this kind of work, and with a financial model that required everything to go mostly right for a mostly reasonable amount of time. He told Emily about the project the way he told her about all his work. Not his performance, not expecting her to be impressed. Just the way you talk about what's taking up your time when you're with someone who actually wants to know. She asked good questions. She remembered details from one conversation and brought them up in the next, which was a thing he'd done for her for 3 years, and which was, he realized, not as common a quality as it should be. One evening in mid-July, sitting on the floor of her Somerville apartment with takeout containers between them and Ruth keeping watch from the windowsill, she said, "What happens if the financial model doesn't hold?" "Then I lose money on it." "Significantly?" "Possibly." He broke apart a pair of chopsticks. "It wouldn't be catastrophic. I've structured it so the exposure is contained, but it would be real." She looked at him. "Does that scare you?" "Losing money?" "Doing something anyway when you know it might cost you." He thought about the honest answer. "No," he said. "The things that scare me are losing people. Losing. Things that can't be rebuilt." He paused. "Money and buildings are just resources. I've always been more afraid of the things that are one of a kind." She was quiet for a moment, looking at her food. "I'm one of a kind," she said. Not arrogantly, just factually, like she was noting that the observation was relevant to the previous statement. "You are," he said. "Is that why you were so careful for so long?" "It's exactly why." She looked up at him. "That's both a very good reason and a very bad strategy." "I know that now." "You knew it then," she said. "You just couldn't make yourself move." He didn't argue the point because she was right. He'd known. He'd understood the math of the situation and been unable to act on it, which was a failure of something he didn't have an exact word for. Nerve, maybe. Or the specific paralysis that comes from having something you value so much that the risk of the next step feels bigger than the cost of staying still. "I'm moving now," he said. She held his gaze. "Yeah," she said. "You are." They ate their takeout on her floor, and the Somerville apartment did its thing, which was to feel small but complete, the east windows doing nothing at this time of night, except reflecting the room back at them, and Ruth on the sill watching the street below with her painted eye, and the city outside making its ordinary summer sounds. The first real fight happened in August, which was, in retrospect, probably overdue. It was about something specific, and also about everything under the specific thing, the way real fights usually are. The surface was a dinner Logan had planned, a fundraising dinner for the Preservation Society, The kind of event he attended out of genuine investment rather than social obligation. The kind that had a formal dress component and a guest list that included a significant quantity of people who would be aware of who Logan Sterling was, and some of whom would want something from him. He asked Emily to come as his date. She said yes, and then 2 days before the dinner, she said she couldn't. "I don't have anything to wear," she said. On the phone, which meant he couldn't read her face. "That's solvable," he said, and immediately knew from the quality of silence that he'd said the wrong thing. "I don't want you to buy me a dress, Logan." "I wasn't going to offer to—" He stopped. He had been about to offer to, which was the problem. "Okay? I know you were." "Okay, I was. I'm sorry." He paused. "Can we back up a second?" "The dress is not actually the issue," she said. Her voice had the flattened quality it got when she was managing something underneath the surface. "I know." "Then can you say what the issue is?" He thought about it. "You don't want to walk into a room full of people who know who I am and have no frame for who you are." Silence. "That's part of it," she said. "What's the other part?" A longer pause. "Those rooms. People in those rooms look at a woman next to a man like you and they make immediate assessments about what she's there for, what she gets out of it." Her voice was even, reporting. "I've been in those rooms before, with Marcus, and I know what it feels like to be looked at as an accessory. And I know that you are not Marcus and this is not that, but the room is the same room," he said. "The room is the same room." He sat with that for a moment. The specific and unfair inheritance of other people's behavior. The way Marcus Hale had contaminated a category of experience that Emily now had to walk back into. He felt the anger that had visited him in May return briefly, and then he let it pass, because anger at absent men was not useful right now. "Okay," he said. "Tell me what would make it not that room." "What?" "If you came, what would make it not feel like that?" A pause. He could hear her thinking. "If I had something to say to people," she said slowly. "A reason I belonged there that was mine and not yours." "You know more about historic preservation than most of the people in that room," he said. "You run a secondhand bookstore that's been operating in the same location for 31 years. That building is itself a piece of the city's commercial history. Gerald's done exactly the kind of work this organization cares about." Silence. "I never thought about it that way," she said. "I know you didn't." He paused. "Come to the dinner, not as my date, as someone who has something to say." Another silence, this one different in quality. Considering. "I still don't have anything to wear," she said. "Then let's solve that separately. Go with your friend." He thought of the woman Emily occasionally mentioned, a friend from her Providence years who'd also landed in Boston. "Go with Claire tomorrow and find something you like that makes you feel like yourself. And I'll pay for dinner at the end of the evening if that feels more neutral." "You're going to pay for the whole Preservation Society dinner." "That's not what I know what you meant." He could hear the very edge of a smile in her voice. The tension had shifted, not gone, but shifted. "I hate that I'm bad at this," she said. "You're not bad at it. You're new at it. That's different." "Is it?" "Yes." He said it simply. Being bad at something means you're failing to do a thing you know how to do. Being new at it means you're learning. You're doing both at the same time, which is hard, but the second one is the one that matters. Quiet. "Logan," she said. "Yeah. Sometimes you say things that—" She stopped. "That what?" "That make it very hard to maintain a reasonable level of self-protection." She said it with the dry precision he loved, the particular Emily Carter mode of expressing something real through a slight register of irony. "Good," he said. "That's the intention." She laughed, the real one. He heard it and felt the tension in the conversation release the rest of the way. She came to the dinner. She wore something she'd found with Claire, dark green, simple, correct. And she walked into the room and she was, to Logan's biased but accurate observation, the most genuinely interesting person there. She talked to an older architect about Gerald's building with the specific authority of someone who had been running it and thinking about it seriously, and the architect listened with the focused attention of a person receiving real information. She charmed the councilwoman Logan had been talking to in May, who turned out to know a lot about the Roxbury neighborhood and had opinions about the row house project that were worth hearing. Logan watched her from across the room for a moment, not hovering, just noting. And what he saw was Emily Carter taking up the space she was entitled to in a room that had previously seemed hostile, and doing it with the dry competence that was her natural mode. He thought, there it is. That's the thing I've been watching for 3 years. That's what it looks like when she decides to arrive. He crossed the room to where she was standing, and she glanced at him when he came to stand beside her, and the glance communicated several things, one of which was something like, I'm okay, stop hovering, and another of which was something warmer that didn't have exact words. He stayed beside her, not hovering. Just there. On the way home, she was quiet in the car, but it was the satisfied quiet of someone who had done something difficult, and found it less difficult than feared. How was that? He asked. Better than I expected, she said. The architect, Daniel, the one with the silver hair, he said Gerald's building is a good candidate for the state register. I'm going to tell Gerald tomorrow. Gerald will be insufferably pleased. Gerald will act like it's obvious, and he's known for years, she agreed, which is basically the same thing as pleased for Gerald. She looked out the window. Thank you for the reframe. What reframe? The one where you told me I belonged there because of what I know instead of who I'm with. He kept his eyes on the road. That was just accurate. I know. That's why it worked. She paused. I need accuracy. I can't do encouragement that isn't true. It just makes me suspicious of the person saying it. I know, he said. I've always known that about you. She looked at him in the dark of the car. You know me pretty well, she said. Yeah, he said. I do. Let's see. The fight that happened 2 weeks later was the real one. The one that didn't resolve in an evening. It started because Logan made a decision that affected Emily without discussing it with her first, which was a failure of the particular variety that stems from good intentions executed without sufficient communication, which is a category of failure that tends to produce the most resentment. Gerald called Logan directly. He'd gotten the number from Emily's phone at some point, which Logan hadn't known, and said, in his blunt and unhurried way, that he'd been thinking about the store, that his reduced hours were probably not temporary, that his cardiologist was suggesting he reconsider the extent of his involvement going forward, and that he had been thinking about options for the store's future, and he'd like Logan's perspective on something. They had a conversation. Gerald floated the possibility of a formal arrangement in which Emily might eventually have a pathway toward owning the store, and he asked Logan if he thought that was a realistic thing, and Logan, operating in his default mode of assessing situations and identifying solutions, said yes, and discussed the financial structures that might make it possible, and said he thought it was a good idea. And they ended the conversation with Gerald saying he'd think on it and that he appreciated the input. Logan intended to tell Emily that evening. He got caught up in a problem on the Roxbury project, a subcontractor issue, hours on the phone. And by the time it was resolved, it was late, and he told himself he'd tell her tomorrow. Gerald told her first. The following morning, at the store. He mentioned the conversation with Logan as though it were established context, and Emily stood in the middle of her store and discovered that 2 people she trusted had had a significant conversation about her future without including her. She didn't call Logan. She texted, which was its own signal. Can you come to the store? Not an emergency, but come. He came that afternoon. He knew from the text's quality that something had gone wrong, and he thought he probably knew what. She was behind the counter when he came in. Ruth was on the shelf above her, keeping the usual watch. Emily's expression was the controlled and flat one that meant she was managing something and doing it deliberately. Gerald called you, she said. A few days ago, yes. And you talked to him about my future at the store. I know he initiated it. Her voice was even and very careful. He told me that. He also told me that you were helpful and thoughtful and that you discussed financial structures. She paused. Logan, he's talking about something I might own one day. That's my life. And you had that conversation without telling me. I know, he said. I know you were going to. She cut across him gently but firmly. I believe you. That's not the point. Then what's the point? She looked at him directly. The point is that a man I trust had a conversation with another man I trust about my life, and I wasn't in the room. And I know neither of you meant anything by it, and I know it came from good places on both sides, but she stopped. Controlled breath. I spent years with someone who made decisions about my life because he thought he knew what was best for me. I know you are not that person. I know this is not that situation. But the feeling, her jaw tightened. The feeling is the same feeling, and I need you to understand that. Logan was quiet. I should have called you the same day, he said. Yes. And I should have told Gerald that the conversation needed to include you. Yes. She held his gaze. I'm not asking you to never talk to Gerald. I'm not asking you to never be helpful. I'm asking you not to make moves in my life, even good moves, without checking with me first. That's a reasonable ask, he said. I know it is. He came around the counter. She let him. He stood beside her, not in front of her, which was a choice he made deliberately. Beside, not facing, not confrontational. I got the asset management part of my brain involved and forgot to include the actual person, he said. That's what happened. I looked at the situation and saw a problem I could help with, and I moved on it before I thought about what it meant that it was your situation. She looked at him sideways. That's the most self-aware you've ever sounded. I've had time in the car, he said. She didn't smile. Not yet. This will happen again, she said. Not this exact thing, but some version of it. She searched for the word. You're a fixer. You see broken things and you want to fix them. I am not a broken thing. I know you're not. Even when I'm struggling, I'm not a restoration project. I know that. He said it plainly and meant it. I know who you are. I don't want to restore you. I want to be with you. Those are different things. She was quiet for a moment. Ruth watched from the shelf above, the painted eye forward. I need you to ask me first, she said, even when it seems obvious. Even when the answer is almost certainly yes. Ask. I'll ask, he said. I mean it. I know you mean it. I'll ask. He paused. And Emily, for what it's worth, Gerald thinks very highly of you. The conversation was entirely about making sure your future in this store was secure. That was his only agenda. She looked up at the shelf at Ruth. I know, she said. I know his heart was right. Yours too. Her voice softened slightly. That's what made it hard. If someone I didn't trust had done it, I'd just be angry. Because it's you and Gerald. She made a small gesture. Complicated. Complicated is something I can work with, he said. I know. She finally looked at him, and the flat, controlled expression had softened back into something closer to her actual face. I'm still annoyed. I know that too. Don't try to solve the annoyance. I'm not. You were about to say something. He closed his mouth. He had been about to say something. I'll wait, he said. She almost smiled. Good. They stood side by side behind the counter for a moment in the particular silence of two people who have come through something and are assessing the other side of it. Outside the store, the August street was doing its August things. Heat, foot traffic, a delivery truck double-parked with its hazards on. Gerald's idea is good, she said finally. The pathway to ownership. She said it like she was testing the words. It's terrifying. I have approximately no business experience. You've been running this store. I've been doing the day-to-day. She paused. Owning it is different. It's different, he agreed. But you know the inventory, the customers, the suppliers. You know what Gerald built here. And if it fails, then it fails. He said it honestly. Businesses fail sometimes. That's not a reason not to try. She looked at him. Is that your investment brain talking? That's my general experience talking. He paused. I've had things fail. You pick through the pieces, you figure out what was valuable, you start again. He looked at her. You're good at that, actually. She held his gaze. Am I? You rebuilt your life from nothing in a city where you didn't know many people after someone did significant damage to your plans. You found Gerald's store, you made yourself essential to it, you kept yourself going for 2 years until... He stopped. Until what? She said. Until a man came in looking for a book for his contractor. She looked at him for a long, still moment. Okay, she said. Okay. Okay, I forgive you. She said it with the directness she brought to all her real statements, no performance around it. For the Gerald thing. I forgive you, and I need you to not do it again. I won't. You might. Then I'll own it the same way I'm owning it right now. She considered this. That's acceptable, she said. He put his hand on the back of her neck, lightly, and she leaned her head back against it slightly, which was as close to a concession as she was going to offer. and he understood that and accepted it without pressing further. September arrived with the cooling that felt like relief after the compressed heat of August, both meteorological and personal. The Roxbury project was in full swing by then, the row houses skeletal and open to inspection, Logan's crews moving through them with the methodical purpose he loved. He brought Emily to the site on a Saturday when the workers weren't there, walked her through the 4 buildings in sequence, explained what had been there and what was coming. She moved through the spaces the way she moved through the bookstore's stacks, with focused attention, stopping at things that interested her, asking questions that indicated she'd been listening to everything he'd told her over the previous months. In the second row house, on the second floor, she stopped at a window frame that had been stripped back to the original wood. Old-growth chestnut, deeply grained, still solid after 100 years of neglect. "This survived," she said. "The bones on this one were particularly good," he said. "It just needed attention. Most of the damage was to the systems, plumbing, electrical, the roof. The structure itself held." She ran her fingers along the wood. "There's a metaphor here," she said. "I know. I'm going to resist making it." "Appreciated." She smiled at the window frame. Then she turned to look at the room. Bare studs, daylight coming through the gaps in the temporary roof covering, the smell of old wood and new sawdust. "I like this part," she said. "Before. Most people prefer after." "After is nice," she said. "But before you can see what everything actually is. All the structure, no decoration." She looked at him. "You're the same in the after phase as you are now." "What do you mean?" "I mean you're not different when things are finished and polished. Some people are. You're the same person in the middle of the mess as you are in the—" She gestured vaguely. "Boardroom, or wherever you go to be impressive." He looked at her in the bare room. "Is that a compliment?" "It's an observation," she said. "But yes." He crossed the room and stood in front of her, and she looked up at him in the way she did when she was deciding something, with the direct and slightly wary assessment that had been her default for so long and was becoming, he noticed, slightly less defended, the wariness still there but with more space around it. He kissed her. In the stripped-back second-floor room of a row house that was in the process of becoming something, in the September light that came through the temporary roof covering, with the smell of old chestnut wood around them. She kissed him back the way she did most things she'd decided to do, fully, without apology. When they pulled apart, she looked at him with the bright-eyed quality she sometimes had when she was feeling something she didn't have immediate words for. "We should have done this 3 years ago," she said. "Yes," he said. "We should have." "Massive waste of time." "Significant, yes." She shook her head. "You know what I think about?" "What?" "Thomas and Margaret," she said. "The letters I found in the donated box. 2 letters from him and 1 from her. I think about whether they found each other." She paused. "Whether they had 3 years of Tuesdays and a box on a doorstep before they figured it out." "Maybe they had more," he said. "God, I hope not." She looked at the window frame again. "I put the letters in a good box. Archival quality. Gerald helped me find the right kind." She paused. "I'm keeping them." "I know you are." "Is that strange?" "No," he said. "Somebody should keep them. Somebody who cares what they mean." She looked at him. In the bare room, in the September light. "I love you," she said. The second time she'd said it, and like the first time it came without ceremony, just the fact of it, stated in her clear, direct voice. "I know," he said. She tilted her head. "You're supposed to say it back." "I love you, Emily Carter," he said. "For the record and without reservation." "Better?" she said. And she was smiling. The full one, the lit one, the real one. Gerald made his decision in October. He called Emily into the store on a Thursday morning, sat down at the reading table in the back that he used for inventory, folded his hands, and told her he was ready to talk about the future of the store in concrete terms. He wanted to formalize a succession plan. Not immediately. He was 68, not 93, he said, with some irritation at the implication, but in a structured way, with clear terms over a period of years, at the end of which Emily would have the first right to purchase the business at a fair valuation from his estate. In the meantime, he wanted to bring her in as a managing partner, with an appropriate adjustment in compensation to reflect the reality of what she'd been doing for the past several months anyway. Emily sat across from him at the reading table and listened to all of this. When he finished, she said, "You should know I talked to Logan about this before I talked to you." Gerald looked at her. "I know," he said. "I called him first." She stared at him. "He told me to include you in any further conversation," Gerald said, with the mildness of a man reporting on events he finds entirely unremarkable. "Said he should have said that the first time." I agreed, so here we are. Emily sat back in her chair. "Gerald," she said. "Emily," he said, "this is the most significant conversation of my professional life." "Yes." "Are you sure?" He looked at her over his reading glasses with the expression he reserved for questions he found slightly unnecessary. "You've been running this store on your own for 4 months, and the revenue is up 11%, he said. "I'm quite sure." She looked at the reading table, at the stacks of books on it, the inventory sheets, the handwritten notes in Gerald's meticulous handwriting. 31 years of someone's life and taste and labor gathered into this specific and peculiar place. "Yes," she said. "Good." Gerald picked up his inventory sheet. "I'll have my lawyer draw up the first set of documents." She stood up. She was halfway to the front of the store when Gerald said, without looking up, "Tell him it worked out." She turned. "Tell who?" "The man who called me back and said to include you," Gerald said. He was already reading the inventory sheet. "Tell him I said it worked out." She stood in the backroom doorway of the bookstore, Gerald's bookstore, almost her bookstore, and felt the specific and unfamiliar sensation of a future that was not fragile. That was hers, genuinely, built from her own competence and someone else's faith and the particular accumulation of time well spent. She went to the counter. She looked up at Ruth on the shelf. Ruth looked at the door with her painted eye, as always. She texted Logan. "Gerald said to tell you it worked out." 3 minutes later, "Good man, Gerald." Then, after a pause, "You okay?" She looked around the store, the complicated stacking, the handwritten signs, the particular amber light that the reading lamp cast, reaching exactly this far and no further. "Yeah," she typed. "I'm really okay." She put the phone down and straightened a stack of books that didn't need straightening, and the October light came through the front window and fell across the floor in the warm and temporary way that October light does. And the city outside moved in its ordinary and indifferent way, and none of it knew or cared what had just happened in the back room of a secondhand bookstore on Clement Street. But Emily knew, and that was enough. The documents Gerald's lawyer drew up were thorough and not particularly romantic, which was exactly right. They ran to 41 pages, covered every contingency Gerald's attorney could imagine, and used the word heretofore more times than Emily had encountered it in her entire previous life. She read them at her kitchen table over 2 evenings with a cup of tea and a legal pad for notes, and when she had questions, she wrote them down and brought them back to Gerald, who answered each one with the patient precision of a man who had been running a business for 3 decades and wanted whoever came after him to understand what they were inheriting. Logan offered once, carefully, to have his own attorney look at the documents. Emily said she'd let him know if she needed that. She didn't need it. What she needed was to understand the thing herself, in her own time, with her own questions, and Logan understood this and did not offer again. This was progress. Not his restraint specifically, though that was part of it, but the larger fact that they had developed, over the months since Vermont, a functional language for the things they each needed. He had learned which of his instincts to act on and which to hold. She had learned which of her defenses were protective and which were just habitual, the kind that had outlasted the threats that had generated them. They had gotten things wrong and corrected them, and the correcting had built something sturdier than getting it right the first time would have. None of this made it simple. Simple was not the word for anything between them, and probably never would be. But there was a difference between complicated and difficult, and what they had was the former more than the latter most days. She signed the first set of documents in November. Gerald witnessed them at the reading table in the back of the store, using his good pen, the one he kept in the inside pocket of his jacket. He did not make a ceremony of it. He slid the papers across the table, she signed where indicated, he countersigned, and then he put the papers in a folder and said, "Right, that's that," in the tone of a man marking off a task he'd been meaning to complete for some time. "Gerald," she said. He looked up. "Thank you." She meant it in a way that was larger than the documents, larger than the managing partnership, or the succession plan, or any of the specific and formal things the 41 pages covered. She meant it for the afternoon 2 years ago when he'd hired her because she could name 6 books in a minute, And for every day since then when he'd trusted her with something he'd built and never made her feel the weight of that trust. He looked at her over his reading glasses. "Don't get sentimental," he said. "It's a business arrangement." "I know it is." "Good." He put the pen back in his inside pocket. Then after a moment, "You're going to be fine, you know." "I know," she said. "I'm not going anywhere immediately," he said. "I'll still be here 3 days a week being difficult about the inventory system. I count on that." "Good." He stood up, straightening his jacket. "Now, there's a box of donations from an estate in Brookline that came in yesterday, and I have strong opinions about whether we should take the Updike." "We shouldn't take the Updike," she said immediately. "We absolutely should not." He walked toward the front of the store. "I'm glad we agree on something." She sat at the reading table for another minute after he left, alone in the back room with its familiar smell of paper and the faint must of old things well tended. Above the doorway, someone had hung a small calendar that Gerald had never updated past February. She'd been meaning to take it down for 2 years. She left it there now, as she always did, because it had become part of the room's character, and removing it would feel like correcting something that didn't need correcting. She pulled out her phone and texted Logan, signed. His response came in under 2 minutes. "How do you feel?" She looked around the back room, at the stacked shelves and the reading table and the ancient calendar and the inventory system that was Gerald's own particular creation and that she now understood completely. "Like I own something," she typed. "Strange. Good strange or bad strange?" She thought about it honestly. Both. Mostly good. 3 dots. Then, "That sounds exactly right." She put the phone away and went to look at the Brookline estate donations, which did not, in her estimation, contain anything worth taking except a collection of mid-century cookbooks and a battered Cheever that she set aside before Gerald could see it and feel smug about the connection. Lily turned 7 in December. She had strong opinions about the birthday, as she had strong opinions about most things, and the primary opinion was that the birthday should involve the bookstore. This had been communicated to Logan in September, clearly and repeatedly, so that by October he had confirmed it with Emily, and by November it was established as fact. "She wants to have her party at the bookstore," Logan told Emily in October, with the slight apology in his voice of a parent presenting a request he suspects may be unreasonable. Emily had looked at him. "I know, she told me." "She told you?" "She texted me." Emily picked up her phone and showed him. The text from Lily, sent from Logan's phone with his permission evidently, read, "Emily, it's Lily. Can I have my birthday at the store? I will be careful. Ruth can come to the party too, she lives there." There was then a drawing of Ruth rendered in emoji that was creative if not literally accurate. Logan stared at his phone. "I didn't know she did that." "She asked me if she could use your phone about 2 weeks ago. I assumed you knew." "She told me she was looking something up." She was. She was looking up how to spell careful." Emily handed the phone back. "I said yes, obviously." Lily's 7th birthday party was 7 children aged 6 to 8, in a bookstore that had been rearranged to accommodate them with Gerald's blessing and a slight anxiety about the inventory that he managed by supervising from behind the counter. Emily had made space in the center of the room by pushing the floor stacks back against the shelves. She'd set up a table with a paper tablecloth, and she'd put Ruth in the center of the table as a centerpiece, which Lily approved of with the intensity she brought to decisions that mattered. It was, objectively speaking, controlled chaos for 2 hours. 7 children in a small bookstore produce a specific and formidable energy that Logan managed by being one of 3 adults present: Logan, Emily, and Patricia, Gerald's daughter, who'd driven up from Providence for the occasion, and who turned out to have a very effective way with 7-year-olds that involved asking their opinions about things and taking those opinions seriously. Logan watched Emily navigate the afternoon with something close to wonder. She was not, she would tell you herself, a person who was naturally comfortable with groups of small children. She did not have the performance mode some adults deploy around kids, the exaggerated enthusiasm, and the cartoon voices. She talked to them the same way she talked to adults, in her direct and honest way, and the children responded to this with the unerring instinct children have for recognizing when they're being taken seriously. She let 2 of them sit on the counter and examine the inventory system. She answered questions about where books came from with accurate information. She told a boy named Ezra, who was 6 and anxious about something he couldn't name, that it was fine to sit in the corner by the window if he needed a quiet spot, and set him up with a picture book about birds and checked on him twice without making it obvious. Lily, in the middle of all of it, was in her element, which was to say she was managing everyone with the focused, benevolent authority she brought to her stuffed animal parliament, and she kept returning to the table to check on Ruth. And at one point, she picked Ruth up and showed her to her friend Maya with the introduction. "This is Ruth. She lives here." Logan's girlfriend gave her a name. Maya examined Ruth seriously. "She only has one eye that you can see," Maya said. "She has two," Lily said. "The other one is on the side." "Why can't you see it?" "Because she's looking forward," Lily said, with the patient tone of someone explaining something obvious. "She's keeping watch." Maya accepted this. Lily put Ruth back in the center of the table. Logan was standing near the back of the store watching this exchange when Emily appeared beside him. "Your daughter," Emily said, "is the most composed 7-year-old I have ever encountered." "She comes by it honestly," Logan said. Emily looked at him. "From you?" "From whoever she is." He paused. "She's mostly herself." Emily looked back at Lily, who had moved on to adjudicating some kind of dispute about a game that had developed organically between 4 of the guests. "She told me this morning that Frank and Ruth should get married," Emily said. "The birds. The birds. She has planned the ceremony and everything." A pause. "She said Frank wanted to wait until they knew each other better, but Ruth thought they'd known each other long enough." Logan looked at Emily. Emily looked at Logan. "Your daughter is not subtle," Emily said. "She really isn't. She also told me she thinks we should all live in the same house." Emily said it evenly, in the reporting way, watching the party. Logan was quiet for a moment. He was aware this was a significant thing being introduced casually in the middle of a 7-year-old's birthday party, which was either very bad timing or very Lily timing, which were sometimes the same thing. "What did you say?" he asked. "I said that was a conversation for grown-ups to have." "And?" Emily looked at him sideways. "And she said, 'I know. I'm just telling you what I think.'" She paused. "She's 7. She's been 7 for approximately 6 hours. She arrived at this opinion fast." They stood side by side watching Lily manage her party, and the afternoon light came through the front windows in the way the bookstore light did, amber and slightly underwater. And the sounds of 7 children in a small space surrounded them. And Logan thought about a conversation that was a conversation for grown-ups to have, and about how it was going to happen, and that it was not going to happen today, but that today was the day it had been introduced into the atmosphere between them, and that was its own kind of beginning. "Frank and Ruth," he said. "Frank and Ruth," Emily agreed. "Ruth made the first move," he said. "Ruth has always been decisive." Emily glanced up at the table where Ruth sat in the center of the paper tablecloth. "She knew what she wanted." "Yeah," Logan said. "She did." The conversation happened in January. Not planned, not announced. The real ones rarely are. It came out of an ordinary evening, which is where most of the real things between them had come from: the floor of the bookstore, the hospital waiting room, the stripped-back room of a Roxbury row house, the kitchen of a Vermont farmhouse. The significant moments had never arrived with warning. They arrived when both of them were present and unguarded, and the thing that needed to be said had simply run out of room to wait. They were at Logan's brownstone, which Emily spent enough nights at by this point that there was a side of the bathroom cabinet that was functionally hers, though neither of them had stated this explicitly. Lily was asleep. They were in the kitchen after dinner, Emily reading at the table, Logan working at the counter on something related to the Roxbury project that required his laptop and several printed documents he kept reorganizing. It was quiet. The particular domestic quiet of a weeknight evening in a house where a child has gone to sleep and the adults have come to rest, which has its own specific texture, lower, more settled than any other kind. Emily looked up from her book. "Lily asked me something last week," she said. Logan looked up from his documents. "She asked me if I was going to be her family." Emily said it carefully, watching her own hands on the book. Not in a pressuring way, just, she asked. The way she asks things, like she wanted data. Logan set down what he was holding. "What did you tell her?" he said. "I told her I hoped so." She looked up. "Is that the right answer?" He looked at her across the kitchen. The brownstone was quiet around them, the old building doing its settling thing, the radiator doing its clanking thing that he'd been meaning to have someone look at for 2 years. "Yeah," he said. "That's the right answer." I want to be careful with her, Emily said. She's been through. She stopped. She lost her mother's presence early. She's built her world carefully with you. I don't want to be someone who comes in and disrupts what she has. You won't be. You can't know that. I know you, he said. You don't disrupt. You find the system and you understand it and you become part of it without dismantling anything. He paused. That's what you did at the bookstore. That's what you've done here. He looked around the kitchen. She loves you. It's not fragile love either. It's Lily love, which is she decided and she doesn't undecide. Emily looked at her book. I love her too, she said, simply. I didn't expect that to happen as fast as it did. She has that effect. She's 7 years old and she has opinions about fonts, Emily said. Of course she has that effect. Logan smiled. Then the smile settled into something more serious. I've been thinking about the house thing, he said. Emily looked up. What Lily said at the party. He was careful with it. I've been thinking about it, and I want to ask you something, and I want you to know that the answer can be no, or not yet, or any version of that, and it won't. Logan, she said. Yeah. Ask me the thing. He looked at her at his kitchen table, with her book and her reading posture and the side of the bathroom cabinet that was functionally hers, and the way she'd been in his house tonight, like it was a place she belonged. Move in, he said. Here, or somewhere new, wherever makes sense, but stop commuting between two places and be here. He paused. With us. Emily was quiet. The Somerville apartment, she started. Has a lease that ends in April, he said. I know, I'm not trying to. He stopped. I'm asking because I want you here, not because of logistics. She looked at him for a long moment. He watched the thing happen that he'd watched happen over the past year. The pause where she checked the terrain, where the old habits ran their automated scan for danger, and then the moment when she chose to override them. I need to tell Dottie myself, she said. Of course. And I want Ruth in the kitchen where there's light. Done. And I'm going to need. She stopped, looked at her hands. I'm going to need you to know that some days I'm still going to feel like I don't entirely belong, like I'm waiting for the part where it goes wrong. That's going to take time to stop. I know that, he said. Take the time. It might be a long time. Emily, he said, with the patience that was not performance, but just his actual nature, the restorer's patience, the man who had spent his professional life understanding that significant work cannot be rushed. I have time. She looked at him. Okay, she said. Okay? Yes. The corner of her mouth moved. Yes, Logan. Okay. He crossed the kitchen, and she stood up from the table, and they stood close the way they had learned to stand close, in the easy and slightly imperfect way of two people who have found each other's geography. He put his arms around her, and she put her face against his shoulder in the way she had in the hospital waiting room the first time, and it was the same gesture and entirely different in meaning because now it was not emergency and not the unknown. It was just where she put her face when she was home. Upstairs, Lily slept in her room with her parliament arranged around her. Harriet the elephant, and Benjamin Franklin the rabbit, and all the rest, keeping their stuffed watch. And in the kitchen, in the ordinary quiet of a January night, something settled into place that had been finding its way there for a long time. The Roxbury row houses were completed in March, 14 months after groundbreaking. The opening was not a party. Logan didn't do parties, not for his projects, but there was a gathering. Neighbors, community members, the historic preservation people. The architect Daniel with the silver hair who had spoken to Emily at the fundraising dinner, the city councilwoman, Gerald, who came and examined the restored exterior with the specific appraising look of a man who knew old buildings. Patricia drove up from Providence. Logan's mother came with Lily, who wore her good shoes and asked highly technical questions of one of the construction foremen about load-bearing calculations until he ran out of answers. Emily stood on the sidewalk in front of the 4 restored row houses and looked at them. The facades were the original brick, cleaned and repointed. The mortar matched to the historic color. The windows were period appropriate, the ironwork restored. From the outside, they looked the way they would have looked in 1908, which was the point. Not a reproduction, but a continuity, the original thing preserved and made functional again. What do you think? Logan said, appearing beside her. She looked at the buildings. They look like they've always been here. They have always been here. You know what I mean. She paused. They don't look restored. They look like they were never in trouble. He looked at the buildings. That's what good restoration looks like, he said. The evidence of the work disappears into the thing itself. She thought about that. About the evidence of work disappearing into the thing itself. About what that meant beyond buildings. Is that how you want it to be? She asked. With everything? What do you mean? She was quiet for a moment. I think about what we were 2 years ago, she said. The box on the doorstep, the floor of the bookstore, the 8 weeks of silence before that. She paused. Sometimes I think people should be able to see the work, so they know it wasn't easy, so they don't assume. She stopped. Assume what? That it just happened, that it was obvious all along. She looked at him. It wasn't obvious. It was hard. We were bad at it for a long time. We were, he agreed. I don't want that to disappear, she said. Into the finished thing. He looked at her in the March light, on the sidewalk in front of the buildings he'd spent 14 months making whole. It won't, he said. We'll know. She held his gaze. Ruth is still on the shelf, she said. I know. The slightly asymmetrical wing, she smiled. The eye that's a little high. The wing is fine, he said. I know the wing is fine, she said. That's what I mean. The imperfect parts are still there. They didn't get fixed. She paused. That's how I'll know we didn't just smooth it all over. He looked at her standing on the Roxbury sidewalk with the March wind doing its thing to her hair, and her green coat that she'd worn at the Preservation Society dinner, and her complete and serious attention to whatever she was thinking about. This woman who had returned everything and kept one thing, who had named a wooden bird after her grandmother, who had read 41 pages of legal documents herself because she needed to understand what she was inheriting, who had said, I love you first, without preamble, in a field at dusk in Vermont, and then checked that he was going to say it back. I love you, he said, preemptively. She looked at him. I know. Then, I love you too. She paused. Now stop being sentimental. We're in public. He laughed. She was already walking toward where Lily and his mother were standing because Lily had spotted them and was gesturing with the urgency of someone who had something specific to report. What Lily had to report, it turned out, was that the foreman had told her the buildings had been structurally compromised when they found them, and she wanted to know exactly what compromise meant, and whether it was like when you made a deal and then broke it, because she had made a deal with Benjamin Franklin, the rabbit, about bedtime, and she wanted to understand if this was the same category of problem. Logan spent 15 minutes on this question with complete seriousness, because it deserved seriousness. Emily stood nearby and listened and watched his face while he explained structural integrity to a 7-year-old, using the rabbit deal as a working metaphor, and she thought about the way he had always treated Lily's questions as real questions, and she thought about the 8 weeks of silence in the winter that felt like a long time ago now, and she thought about a cardboard box and a wooden bird and 3 years of Tuesday afternoons. She thought about what she would tell people, if they asked. She had been asked, already. Claire in Providence, who had driven up for the Roxbury opening, had asked over coffee that morning how they'd gotten from 3 years of careful nothing to here, and Emily had found that the story was difficult to compress without losing the essential texture of it. The part that mattered wasn't the dramatic stuff. The box, the floor, the phone call with her voice breaking. Those were the legible moments, the ones with clear narrative shape. The part that mattered was harder to explain, the quality of attention. The way he had listened for 3 years and remembered everything. The way he had made something with his hands and given it to her without explanation, and she had understood exactly what it meant. He gave me a lot of things, she'd told Claire, and I gave them all back. Except one. Claire had looked at her. Why that one? Emily had thought about it. Because he made it, she said. Everything else he found or bought. That one he made himself. You can't return something someone made themselves. It would be like... She'd paused. It would be like returning the part of them that made it. Lily decided in April that Frank and Ruth should be formally introduced. She brought Frank from the Vermont farmhouse on a Saturday visit to the bookstore, carrying him in both hands with the care of someone transporting something valuable. She placed him on the shelf beside Ruth, slightly behind her, with the spatial arrangement of someone who has given the positioning significant thought. She stepped back and examined the result. He's watching where she's watching, she said. Emily, behind the counter, looked at the two birds on the shelf. Frank, with his geometric interpretation of tail and his strong opinions about his own wing structure, and Ruth, with her slightly asymmetrical right wing and her painted eye fixed forward. He is, Emily said. That means they're a team, Lily said. Two sets of eyes on the same thing. Logan, sitting in the chair by the window that had become, over the past several months, a chair that was functionally his in the geography of the store, looked up from the book he was reading. Good logic, he said. I know, Lily said without false modesty. She came to stand beside Emily at the counter and looked at the two birds on the shelf. Ruth was here first, she said. She was, Emily said. So Frank joined her world. Lily thought about this. That's good. He went to where she was. Emily looked at her. This 7-year-old with her parliament and her opinions about fonts and her fast-moving eyes that saw everything. Yeah, Emily said. That's good. Lily seemed satisfied. She went to find her father's attention for something else, and Emily stood behind the counter of the store that was becoming her store and looked at the two birds on the shelf, the careful one and the geometric one, the one made with 3 weekends of patient work and the one made in a Vermont afternoon, and felt the specific weight of a life that had accumulated meaning without her fully noticing it happening. That was the thing nobody told you, that the significant moments were not always the ones that announced themselves, that sometimes the story was being written in the Tuesday afternoons and the adequate tea and the texts about nothing important and the side of a bathroom cabinet and a 7-year-old's parliament of stuffed historical figures. The box on the doorstep had felt like the story. The floor of the bookstore had felt like the story. But those were just the moments when the story became legible. The actual story had been happening the whole time, in every small and ordinary and imperfect thing. Ruth stayed on the shelf. Frank stayed beside her. They watched the door together with their painted eyes, and the amber light reached exactly this far, and the city outside did its city thing, indifferent and continuous and entirely unconcerned with the specific and private and real thing that had been happening for years inside one small second-hand bookstore on Clement Street. When people asked, and people asked because the story had a shape that invited asking, they usually directed the question to Emily, the way people direct questions to the person who seems like the one who would know. She'd laugh first. Always. The particular laugh she had for things that were both painful and funny in retrospect. I returned every gift he ever gave me, she'd say. Every single one. Scarves, books, records, all of it. I packed it all up and left it on his doorstep. And then they'd wait. Except one, she'd say. And Logan, if he was there, would smile in the way he smiled when something was exactly right. And if they asked what she kept, she would tell them about the bird. The cedar waxwing with the slightly asymmetrical wing and the painted tail and the eye that was a little high. The one he'd made himself over 3 weekends in Vermont, getting the shape wrong twice, with a brush the size of a toothpick for the color. The one that sat on the shelf of the bookstore now, keeping watch with another bird beside it, and had sat on the windowsill of a Somerville apartment before that, and before that in the palm of her hands on the floor of a bookstore on a Friday night when everything finally ran out of room to wait. Why that one? People would ask. She had different answers for this, depending on the day and the person asking. Sometimes she said because she couldn't put it down. Sometimes she said because it was the most honest thing he ever gave her. Sometimes she said because when she held it, she understood everything he'd been trying to say for 3 years, and you can't give that back. But the truest answer, the one she gave herself, in the quiet, when she was being fully honest, was simpler than any of those. She kept it because it was imperfect, because the wing was slightly off, and the eye was a little high, and she could see, in the small asymmetries of it, the exact shape of the effort it had taken. Because he had made something real and given it to her without explanation, and trusted her to understand, and she had understood, and some part of her had known from the moment she first held it that this was not a thing she could return. You can return something someone found for you. You can return something someone bought. But you cannot return the evidence of someone's care. You cannot put that back in a box. It doesn't fit. She had tried. 3 times she had put the wooden bird in the cardboard box, and 3 times she had taken it back out, and that taking back was the first honest thing she had done in a long time. The first moment when she had stopped managing her own feelings for the sake of some imagined safety and had simply done the true thing. She had kept the bird, and the bird, in the end, had kept her. The rest was the significant work. The daily, imperfect, patient, frightening, necessary work of two people building something that could hold, not because it was perfect, but because they were honest about the places where it wasn't, and they kept working anyway, and the working was the point, not the finished thing. The working. Logan knew this. He had always known it. He built his life around knowing it. Emily had learned it. And Lily, 7 years old, with her parliament and her opinions and her fast-moving eyes, had known it all along, the way children sometimes know the essential things before they've accumulated enough experience to talk themselves out of knowing. 2 sets of eyes, she had said, looking at the birds on the shelf. That means they're a team. Outside, the city moved. The light in the bookstore was warm. The documents in Gerald's lawyer's filing cabinet were real, and the side of the bathroom cabinet in Logan's brownstone was real, and the east-facing windows in a Somerville apartment that Emily would leave in April were real, and the 41 pages and the adequate tea and the stone wall at the edge of a Vermont field were all real. And on the shelf of a secondhand bookstore on Clement Street, 2 wooden birds kept watch. One of them had a slightly asymmetrical wing. That was the one she kept. That was the whole story.